used to be employed as a child protection worker. A report came through about a stepfather who was being abusive to his children. I was given the investigation by my team leader. When I interviewed the oldest child with the police, she had very visible physical injuries and told me exactly what had happened. I'll spare the details, but it was horrific. As the children were in his sole care, we knew that they needed to be removed immediately. We sent a team of 2 workers out to the children's school while myself and a colleague called the stepfather into the office. I led the interview and it was horrible. He didn't even try to deny that he had hurt his stepchild, basically saying, "That's my kid. I'll do what I want and you can't stop me." When I served him the paperwork, he absolutely lost his mind. He was swearing and screaming and said, "If we were outside this building right now, I would fucking kill you." We ended up running out of the interview room, pressing our emergency alarm, and I even had to make a police report about the whole thing. It got really messy. The very next day, we had court for the children, and my manager decided I shouldn't attend due to everything that had happened the previous day. My colleague, who did attend, told me that this man was at court and yelled several times something to the effect of, "Where is that of a worker who took my kids?" I remember feeling a little freaked out, but it's not uncommon to hear things similar to this when you have to remove a child. It's understandable that emotions are very high. You build a bit of resilience working in this field, and overall I mainly felt relieved that those children had been placed with an aunt and were safe. About 2 weeks later, I had to stay back late at the office on an unrelated job. It was about 9 p.m. when I finished, and I was the only person there. I walked out the back of the building to my car. It was really dark, but when I got close, I thought I saw a shadow moving at the front of my car. Just for a second, and then it was gone. I was about 20 meters away at this point, but it startled me. I stood there for a second just looking at my car, wondering if I was just being paranoid. While staring into the darkness, I started hearing tiny rustling noises, and whether imagined or not, all of the true crime horror stories I've ever heard flashed into my mind. Safe to say, I freaked myself out and sprinted back to the building. I called my boyfriend to come pick me up, explaining what had happened. By the time he drove up to the front doors, I had convinced myself I was being silly and asked him to drive me around to my car. He circled around, and with the headlights shining on my car, I could very clearly see that all 4 of my tires had been slashed. I was an absolute mess that night and called the police immediately. I was pretty sure that this man was responsible, but as I hadn't seen him, I couldn't say for sure. I took a few days off and came back to a meeting with my manager, who had put together a safety plan for me and the other staff. She had organized to have a security guard escort us to our cars and said very clearly that no one was to stay in the building after hours alone. Then, about a week later, a letter was delivered to the office addressed to me. Any mail that comes into the office goes through our reception staff first. Our lovely receptionist opened it, and it was a note that said, "You're as good as dead, bitch." The words were typed and printed. She was an older woman and burst into tears when she read it. It didn't say who had sent it, but I was convinced it was the same man. Over the next few weeks, letters kept coming, each one getting longer. They addressed me as quote bitch and quote homewrecker, saying that I kidnap and abuse children. It was just horrible, horrible stuff. The threats in the letters were the worst. The person writing them threatened to torture, kill, find out where I live, and to burn down the entire building. To be honest, the police were less than helpful. They basically said that given the nature of our work, they couldn't conclusively say it was this man, although they had questioned him. To me, it all seemed like a pretty massive coincidence. I never had anything like this happen to me before. They did say that they were taking the letters very seriously and tracking down where they had been posted from, but I never heard anything back about that. My workplace took the threats very seriously too. All of the security was bumped up across the building, and all staff completed refresher training on emergency management. One day, on the way home from work, I noticed that a car was following me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, so I drove down a bunch of little streets. I doubled back onto the same route in a way that would make absolutely no sense. Even after all of that, this dark green Camry was still paced a little way behind me. I freaked out, but had already planned in my head what I was going to do in this situation. I headed straight to the police station, planning to pull right up to the front of the building and beat my horn until I had someone's attention. The second I pulled into the police station, the green Camry drove straight past and disappeared down a nearby side street. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, too scared to get out of the car in case they came back around the corner. It dawned on me that in my panic I had forgotten to get the license plate. That upsets me to this day. I told the police what I knew, but they told me that the man didn't have any car registered in his name. This was the final straw for me. I was a nervous wreck. I was looking around constantly at work and at home. I knew that he lived relatively close to me, so I even stopped going grocery shopping in case I ran into him. I stayed on stress leave for a month and heard from colleagues that the letters kept arriving. I was honestly ready to quit, but then COVID happened. It really changed everything. Everyone went into lockdown and all access to the office was restricted. I started back working from home, driving a work car to and from appointments. I didn't go into the office regularly anymore, only allowed in small working groups when absolutely necessary. Over the next year, the letters slowed and eventually stopped. By the time we were allowed back in the office, there hadn't been any sign of this man for almost 7 months. About a year later, I left child protection. I don't know what happened with those children, but my hope is that they are happy and safe with their family. And as for the man who I believe stalked and threatened me for doing my job, let's not meet ever again. I'm in university right now, but staying with my parents at their house for the summer. I was hanging out with one of my friends and we decided to go to a party. I met this guy around my age, and we were talking and having fun, but it was nothing too serious. Or so I thought. We exchanged phone numbers and we hung out a couple of times, but he became incredibly clingy right from the start, so I decided to distance myself in the hope that he would get the hint and back off. Well, he didn't. When I stopped responding, he sent me over 100 messages, with each message becoming increasingly more aggressive as time went on. Keep in mind, it had been less than 2 weeks since we first met. I finally responded and told him that he needed to chill out. He appeared to calm down a bit after I responded, but then he asked for a phone call. I agreed, and we talked for a while. He told me that he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I was the best thing that ever happened to him, etc. It was just a bunch of stuff that is way too intense to say to someone you barely know. I tried to let him down gently, reminding him that I was only home for the summer and I wasn't looking for anything serious beyond a fling. But this only made him angrier. He started yelling at me, insulting me, calling me a slut, basically a complete 180 from what he had just been saying mere minutes ago. Then, all of a sudden, the phone went silent. After a pause, he said in a quiet voice, "Bitch, you'd better get ready because I'm coming over for you." And then he hung up the phone. This was very frightening because he knew my parents were out of town for the week, and that I was staying at their house, alone. However, he didn't know where my parents' house was because I was always the one driving, and he didn't know my friend either, so I thought he had no way of figuring it out, since again, I'm normally living at school in another state. Regardless, I locked all the doors and shut the blinds just in case. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I fell asleep. When I woke up, I looked at my phone and saw a notification on my lock screen. It was from the Ring app, indicating that there had been movement on my parents' camera. It was him. If you watch the video, you can clearly see something in his hand. When he notices the camera, however, he leaves. I immediately blocked him on everything and reported the incident. I have no idea what he planned to do once he got here. It was terrifying to realize that he had come over when I was asleep and defenseless, and completely unaware of his presence. As I would later find out, he was able to get my address from my phone number. Apparently, he Googled it and it returned my dad's name as the owner of the phone number, along with my parents' address. Since I'm on my parents' phone plan, I guess it shows up that I still live here. This revelation was fucking horrifying, as I never knew my phone number could reveal my home address. I'm still extremely upset that this kind of private information is on the internet for anyone to find, as it is incredibly dangerous that websites will just give this away to anyone. Please learn from my mistakes and do not give anyone your phone number unless you trust them completely. I found out that you can get a free Google Voice number to text and call people, and that number can't be traced back to you so easily. My advice is to use a disposable phone number for anyone you're talking to that you meet informally or online. I still can't sleep at night. Hopefully this never happens to anyone else. I'd like to preface this by saying I don't believe in ghosts. I was walking through the woods after finishing for the better part of the day. I decided to stay out real late and try and fish up some bullheads from a local watering hole. I was only about 13 and stayed out way later than I normally would. Usually I would take a trail home, but decided to cut through some thicker bush to get to my grandparents' house so I could call my mom. I knew she'd probably be freaking out a bit, even though this happened from time to time. There was an abandoned graveyard on my route. I don't remember what the story was about it, but I knew it was there. I had wandered past it before, but never really checked it out. It's all overgrown and wild. I knew that if I followed the outskirts of the graveyard, I'd hit the road and be home free. The day had already been pretty chilly overall for a late spring day, but I swear in my teenage brain that it was getting colder. I remember looking at my breath and thinking how weird it was how cold it had gotten. It was overall a pretty bright night, near a full moon, but in the woods it was still really hard to see. The graveyard was wide open, no trees, and it was well lit. As I was walking up, I noticed that the ground was covered in a thin layer of fog and remembered looking into the graveyard and not really registering what I saw at first. It was a person, which at first didn't seem odd, so I kept quiet and walked into the woods a bit more so I didn't get spotted. I didn't know who it was, so I just wanted to keep clear. I stepped behind some trees and lost sight of them for a moment, and when I came back around the tree, they were gone. This was weird because I was only behind the tree for maybe a few seconds tops. I didn't hear anything either. I walked a bit further, keeping an eye out, and I was a bit creeped out. Near the graveyard was a rundown barn? I'm not really sure, but as I got closer to it, I could see that someone was inside. I got a good look, and it was a woman, probably in her 50s. The way the moonlight hit her made her look incredibly pale. She seemed to be digging, but I didn't hear anything. No sounds of a shovel or her making noise in any way. I was only about 30 feet away. I could see she stopped and disappeared behind some debris. I decided to get the heck out of there and quickly moved to get to the road. I tried to keep track of her, looking for where she went, but I couldn't find her anywhere. It was like she literally disappeared. I kept trucking and came out to the road. The fog was pretty much covering the road at this point, which was a small country road, fields on one side and woods on the other. As I walked down the road, she would randomly appear behind and in front of me, and I started hiding and basically playing cat and mouse. Each time I saw her, she was really hard to see. I could only see her in the moonlight and stuck to the remnants of some of the old houses nearby. She always looked pale and never made any noise. Once I got past the part of the road which had a number of barn foundations and home remnants, I never saw her again, and it instantly started getting warmer. This creeped me the heck out, and I never want to feel that way again. I didn't know who or what that was, but I told my uncle about it, and he went and checked it out, thinking maybe someone was trying to excavate the graves. He said there wasn't anything messed with, though. They thought I was lying. Still gives me the shakes just typing this out, though. I know it was most likely someone wandering around looking for stuff or checking the place out, but what teenage me remembers didn't seem natural. It was also weird that she never made noise. She also seemed to be able to just appear and move around me, and at one point she was right behind me, and I swear a moment later, she was right in front of me. I recently built a new PC. It wasn't exactly powerful, as I wanted to spend as little money on it as possible. It was good enough to run Source Engine games like TF2, but nothing like Battlefield or Crysis. I was strictly looking for the cheapest way into PC gaming. Looking for a bit of nostalgia before I began playing some Team Fortress, I popped in my Halo CE disc into the tray and installed it. I have some fond memories playing with my group of friends and wanted to relive a bit of my past. I instantly started to have problems installing it. Aside from all of the minor compatibility issues this game has with Windows 7, I didn't have my CD key. Well, technically I still have it, but the game's CD key was tied to some other PC that was long gone. I was fed up with that, so I just booted up another game, slightly frustrated that I wasted about an hour of my life on that thing. It didn't take long though for me to start looking for workarounds so I could play. I eventually found a keygen, and the game started to install. I picked up the name that I used years ago, Dystionid, and hopped into the multiplayer lobby. I just picked a random game of Capture the Flag and joined to see if everything worked. It didn't, of course. A pop-up appeared and said that the server's client needed to be updated. The error messages got weirder and weirder. I should have taken a screenshot of some of them. Some of them were almost laughable. Random selections of words would replace the error messages. Completely random. It seemed no one else online had this problem. The ones that did were told to try updating their game. This information was no use to me though, because I updated it when I first booted it up. However, I still wanted to play. It didn't really matter if no one could join my gimpy out-of-date server, so I went and created an internet game. Before this, I started up Fraps to capture any weird error messages. I chose Capture the Flag on Blood Gulch, and the game started to load. Now, some of you guys that have played Halo extensively know that there are certain points on any given map that you can glitch up to so people can't find you. These points require that you utilize glitches like pushing yourself through a wall with a vehicle, but there was also one I couldn't get to. It took such crucial mouse movements and careful precision to even make it to the first step. Since I had nothing better to do in an empty server, I reattempted the glitch. So I got myself into a ghost and made my way over to the middle-ish part of the map. I lined myself up against the pillar and began trying to nudge myself into the wall. If you hurl yourself towards it too slowly, you'll just be knocked off to its side. If you do it too quickly, you'll just plain knock yourself through the wall into the abyss. Getting in between there is what I'm trying to get at. A few tries later and I'm in. That was the easy part. The next few parts are hard to explain in text. I had to kinda shimmy across the wall until I start to get pushed off by something invisible. I now have to jump on that invisible thing without sliding off, and it's cake from there. A few tries later and I had it again. The vantage point this glitch had on the other side of the map made it rightfully so for it to be the hardest to achieve. My victory was cut short when my Spartan just drops dead though. What the crap? I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. Maybe I was out of bounds for too long? I couldn't think about this for too long until I started dying randomly even more. I started to get creeped out. The text just said, "Dystionid died." I've never seen a pop-up like this in Halo before. I went down into my base just to make sure nothing was hitting me. I sat there for what seemed like minutes, and I was observing everything. I leaned forward so my face was practically touching the monitor. Then my screen went black for a second. I didn't have any time to notice what was going on when I heard this horrible screeching noise. I reacted by knocking my headphones onto the keyboard, and everything was dark. Dark to the point where I could barely make out anything. Then, a player joined. The player who had just joined my seemingly impossible to join server was named Juliet. I was thinking this must have been the person who was making me drop dead. It also must have been her who made that horrible sound. It seemed impossible for her to control my Spartan's life, or even emit noises that aren't in the game. I just wanted to see if I could go shoot at her, so I took off to the Blue's base. I was thinking maybe this was all a coincidence and a couple other players will join, and this is just a normal game of Capture the Flag. The outward appearance of the Blue base seemed normal, but inside was something disturbing. On the left wall in the back, there were words which I made out to be, "Find me." I was just about to exit right out of the game, but I was stopped in my tracks when a text appeared on my screen. I nearly forgot you could chat in the game. Juliet just sent a smiley face. I said, "Who are you?" Juliet replied by saying, "Let's play hide and seek." After I dropped dead once again, I quit and shut down my server. I didn't want to hear whatever she had to say next, and frankly I was kinda creeped out by the whole situation. I honestly don't know if this is a normal occurrence. Maybe the community has been overrun with hackers and this happens all the time. So, the gist of my plan is to play hide and seek with her and to see where it takes me. I honestly don't know how I didn't make the connection between, quote, "find me" and her saying, "let's play hide and seek." But here's the problem. This was probably just some one-time thing, a random occurrence. Although I'm giving myself the benefit of the doubt, I don't think she'll ever come back. I'm still going to play though. Same setup and everything. It probably gives me the best chance of summoning Juliet again. And with all of that out of the way, I don't think I have much else to say. Nothing much has happened since I quit out of the game. I mentioned that I had something creepy happen on my game during the trip. They seemed to find this hilarious and was their main source of ridiculing me, saying things like, "Oh, should we pack it up early? I don't want to keep you from performing an exorcism on your game disc." I'm gonna play again as soon as possible, so expect another update tomorrow. Update. I didn't sleep last night. I was too excited to play. No, excited wasn't the word. I was anxious to play. I wanted to get this out of the way so I could move on with my life. All I needed to do was just see if she would join again and play hide and seek. So why not pull the band-aid and play so I can rest easy tomorrow? Well, I did just that. I started up Halo and created a LAN server instead of an internet server. This time I'd know if some weird crap was really going on. I hit start server and the map started to load up. Well, the first thing I noticed was that I could actually see again. Everything looked normal enough. This wasn't nearly as scary as I remembered it being. I decided to give myself a 10-minute time limit to wait before I tried switching to an internet game or just calling it a night. All I could do was fill the time by aimlessly wandering around Blood Gulch. This obviously got boring after 3 to 4 minutes, so I started calling out to her. "Hey Juliet, getting tired here. What am I supposed to do?" That seemed to do it. Juliet joined. A strange mixture of fear and confusion came over me because I thought I had everything figured out. I thought she was just a random player who was screwing with me. But now, it looks like if she was waiting for me. And on top of that, I was playing on a LAN game. I didn't believe what I was seeing. Am I now supposed to believe that she's some sort of magical technological ghost that transcends space and time? I don't know what to believe anymore. She says, "Do you want to play now?" I respond, "Yeah." My game froze and everything went dark again. But this time there was a noise. It was just looping over and over again. I started to look around for her, barely able to keep my mouse under control because I was shaking. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't really want to do this. I don't know why I said yes to her. But I feel like I'd be letting you guys down if I didn't see this through. Juliet said, "Count to 10. So I counted to 10. I was just going to search from the back of the map to the front. That seemed like the most efficient way to go about this. I eventually found her crouched in a corner looking at me. "You found me." I didn't know whether or not she was just going to immediately leave after I found her, so I asked her, "Who exactly are you?" "That's not the question you should be asking," she said. "Then what should it be?" I replied. "You should be looking for a place to hide." And with that, she quit out of the server. I tried for an hour after this, attempting to get her back. I even made a server named, quote, "Juliet, please join." None of that worked. She's gone. After all, she got what she wanted, a simple game of hide and seek. Well, this happened about 30 years ago when I was scuba diving with my parents. I was only 16, so my parents were pretty reluctant to let me go with them. We stayed shallow, swimming along a kelp forest. Honestly, it was beautiful, as the sun shone through the thick, waxy leaves. My sister and I decided to explore the forest, with our parents following suit close behind. It's very easy to get disoriented in those kelp forests, so always remember to bring a partner with you. As we were swimming, following fish and weaving around the waxy stalks, we saw a swarm of all different kinds of animals, fish, sea stars, and some undersea iguanas swarming something. As we approached whatever it was, the swarm parted and I was brought face to face with a pale, half-naked skull. It was another diver who had gone in alone. When he got lost in the kelp, he must have panicked, got tangled, and drowned. The animals then proceeded to devour half of his face, both his arms, and his penis, which was exposed through his ripped wetsuit, and in the course of only 2 hours. I saw all of this in only a few seconds when my parents pulled me out of the forest quickly. They brought us to shore when I started crying. My parents quickly called the police and the diver was taken out of the water. His body was so waterlogged that it took 4 men to carry him out. That was something I couldn't get out of my head for years, even with therapy. I still dive and I enjoy diving, but I always stay far away from any and all kelp forests. I was a year out of college and had just moved back to the North Shore area about 4 weeks before the storm hit. When the call came to evacuate, I packed up with my family and 4 other families that we were very close with to caravan out of the area. We evacuated, but finding a place to stay was troublesome. We wound up going all the way to northeast Texas, where we stayed in a campground for 2 nights before going to a friend of a cousin's lake house near Oklahoma. We stayed for about 4 more days before we heard rumors that you could get back down south. Mind you that there was no cellular service much past Baton Rouge for a while. There was significant storm damage and power outages as far north as Natchitoches, Louisiana. So we drove to Jackson, Mississippi, and of all things stayed at a lovely B&B for 2 nights while we tried to get supplies. Mind you, Jackson is almost 200 miles north of New Orleans, and every store was either very low or completely out of gasoline, candles, batteries, bottled waters, generators, you name it. We wound up finding a small mom-and-pop hardware store that sold oil lamps and lamp oil, so we bought all of those, about 3 dozen lamps, and all the lamp oil and wicks that they had. Then we started to drive south again. If you've ever driven down I-55 in Mississippi, you may be familiar with the invasive kudzu plant that covers, well, everything. All the trees, bushes, plants, etc. The closer we got to Louisiana, the more you could see the trees start to bed from wind and the kudzu disturbed. It was actually very odd. We made it as far as Washington Parish before we hit roadblocks. This was about 10 days after Hurricane Katrina, give or take. From Washington Parish to St. Tammany Parish, we wound our way in on back roads via a good old-fashioned road atlas. There was no power, no gasoline stations, nothing was open, and there was just endless storm damage. Roofs were blown off, trees were scattered everywhere, and the ones that were still standing had been blown to almost a 50-degree angle. There was localized flooding, and worst of all, lots of downed power lines. When we got to one of the family's houses, we stopped. It was on a lot of land, and we could all hang out together. No one knew how long it would take to get to the lake. There was no cell service, no radio, obviously no telephone or television service, and when the sun went down, it was just dark. But there was still plenty to do. The house had suffered minor damage, but the property was a mess. I learned how to use a chainsaw. Every day was spent working from the time the sun came up until it went down. We cleared the driveway, the property, and then went to work with the rest of the community that had started to come back and worked on clearing the roads. This was in late summer, and late summer in Louisiana without AC is not a fun time. But every day was so physically demanding that we slept like logs anyway. Every other day we sent a few people to find more water, gasoline, and food. They once came to a Red Cross station near Covington, and they reported that there were at least 500 people there, and by 10 a.m. all the supplies had run out. I saw fights over very mundane things like 5-pound bags of ice, MREs, gas purchases, D batteries, and most heartbreaking, I saw people abandoning their pets because they were unable to take care of them. My dad was working abroad, and as soon as he could, he flew to Dallas, then Houston, then rented a car and drove across I-10 with an SUV filled with bottled water and a generator he found near Beaumont, Texas. The generator was used to cool the refrigerator and run fans at night. 3 weeks after the storm, we could navigate most of St. Tammany Parish well enough, and by that point things were in full swing. Stores were getting deliveries, power lines were being repaired, roads were being consistently cleared, etc. Though the bridge from Slidell to New Orleans had been damaged and was unusable. Homes and buildings along the lake were in toothpick-sized shards. It was easily visible where the storm surge had hit and how far the water levels rose from the lake. There was a huge spike in crime, and otherwise very safe and suburban communities along the North Shore. There was consistent looting, reports of shootings, and fights in stores that were downright commonplace. It was a really horrible time. Many people lost all of their things, which sure, it's just stuff, but it isn't easy to rationalize that when 3 generations of heirlooms and keepsakes have been destroyed completely, along with their home, their neighborhood, and their community. I didn't know about what happened in the Superdome and Convention Center for weeks. I didn't even know that there had been a huge telethon to raise money until almost a year later. I didn't even know for almost 6 months if any of my friends survived. But let us not forget that the storm hit the Gulf Coast, not just New Orleans. Coastal Mississippi was devastated, and only a few weeks after that storm, Hurricane Rita gave the far west Gulf Coast its own major storm. I have to make sure to recognize all the road, power, telecom, etc. crews that came from all over the nation to help get people in the area connected and moving again. The other thing I want to call out is the illness that has plagued the community since the storm. I have no scientific data or even a great knowledge of things, but in my own personal inner circle, the instances of cancer since the storm would blow your mind. Mostly men and women who are older than 45 when the storm hit. And all kinds of cancer, all along the Gulf Coast, especially in adults of all ethnicities. I don't really know what gets stirred up during these storms, but I'm not exaggerating when I say more than 75% of the adults I know or knew suffered serious health complications after the storm. Here's my takeaway. FEMA obviously didn't have a plan before this storm. The Red Cross can only do as much as it possibly can. This stuff brings out the worst in people, and I love my family and friends. A few years ago, when Steam was old, like really old, meaning the retro days of Half-Life and Team Fortress, I had an account that I used to play Half-Life Deathmatch and generally play mods on. I had just about one friend on Steam at the time who I knew well. I never really interacted with people in online games. I got this ad from a guy called Toymaker26. I didn't recognize the name from any game I had played before, so I just declined. A week later on the same day, and around the same time, I get a notification that Toymaker26 has added me as a friend, which was creepy to say the least. I gave him the benefit of the doubt by accepting, thinking maybe he was just a real-life friend or something. As soon as I did though, a chat box pops up with him saying, "Hi, are you okay?" or something to that effect. But before I could say the generic, "I'm good, you?" he sent me this link that was clearly a virus link. Being the fearless bastard that I am, I clicked it just to see what would happen. Not really, I just clicked it because I didn't know any better. And boy, was that a mistake. The webpage opened up with all these really low quality pictures of people mutilated, and this sound playing in the back that was like a really distant laugh that was on a loop. I remember my heart literally drained from fear. I'm sure you know the feeling. I obviously clicked out of it, but my desktop background was a close-up of one of those fucked up images now. My disk drive kept opening and closing, and a message box popped up asking if I was okay, before my computer completely shut down. It never turned on again. A forever blue screen. We had to get a new PC, I remember. Apparently every file on the computer had been corrupted, even BIOS data, somehow. I still have no idea who Toymaker26 is to this day or why he did it, but I do know that those were some amazing hacking skills he's got. I was about 13 at the time and I was scared shitless. That experience made me so afraid of the hacking world of the internet. A few friends and I went on an overnight hike in the Rockies behind our little town a few years back when I was in high school. Our camping site was pretty far up there and it was getting really dark. The spot we were at was nestled in a grove of trees secluded from the wind and elements, so we decided to stop there for the night. The four of us built a little fire and ate dinner, then we just talked for a few hours. All of a sudden, my friend leaps forward and douses the fire with our emergency water, plunging us into complete darkness. Needless to say, the rest of us were pretty pissed as there was no reason for him to do this. He quickly shushes us, and we realize that he's absolutely terrified. Like so scared he couldn't even speak or move. The rest of us managed to get a few words out of him, and he tells us to look up on the ridge where we should have been camping at. It was pretty far up, so it was kind of hard to see at first, but that sight will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was a fire, a big one, like a bonfire sort of thing. Around this fire were several figures moving in a slow circle. They were humanoid, but not quite, and they all had arms and legs like people, but something just seemed different about them, and I can't really explain it. It was almost like their limbs were too long and skinny or something, but maybe not. Anyway, these figures just moved around the fire in a really slow circle over and over and over again. My one friend claims that he could hear them singing something, but I don't really remember anything like that. Importantly, there was one standing off to the side a little ways, leaning with his arm on a tree branch above his head. The whole experience really creeped us out, but we were able to sleep it off. We figured it was a scout troop having a camp or something. Morning eventually came, and we decided to finish off our hike to the peak, and on the way down we passed the place we saw the figures and decided to check out the camp. It was completely deserted. It was obvious though that there had been a fire, and there were footprints everywhere. Inside the fire pit was a small mound of charred animal bones, probably chipmunk or something, and a pile of 4 or 5 rodent skulls that had been burned. Creepy, right? Then we look over at where that one figure was standing. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to be of concern. Then we see the tree branch he was casually leaning against. It was well over any of our heads, and I'm over 6 foot. That would mean that in order for the figure to lean against it, he was like at least 7 feet tall. Needless to say, we got off that mountain very fast, and I have never been up there again. We even called the Fish and Wildlife Rangers and told them what we saw. They said it was probably just a bunch of kids messing around and not to worry about it. And it might have been just that. We let our imaginations run wild. But all 4 of us swear to this day that we saw the same thing, and it didn't look like a bunch of kids in the dark. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but those mountains still scare the shit out of me, and I will never go back there again. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but there is something out there, ghost or dumb kids. I'm not going anywhere near it. America Online was a big thing when I was 13, or in other words for my generation, AIM, which stood for, you guessed it, AOL Instant Messenger. It was around 2002, and I would have been a fresh 13-year-old in 8th grade. I had many times went into chat rooms by myself or with my friends just goofing around. Unfortunately, unsolicited photos were a thing then too, but usually you could stay clear of that kind of stuff by the chat room you entered. I didn't have any photos of myself, and this was back when you had to take a digital photo and upload it from your camera. Plus, I was 13 and really self-conscious, which I'm sure anyone can relate with. But one day, a guy popped up on my screen wanting to chat. It was fine at first. I was very naive back then, and we quickly fell into a pattern of talking. His name was Dave, and he lived in California. Eventually, it led to him telling me that he loved me, etc. But the problem was, he was 19. Now, I wasn't proud of this, but at first, being 13, I just sent photos of some random girl and said it was me. He instantly fell for me, telling me my age is just a number and how mature I was. Now at this point, he did not live, quote, in state, so there was never any chance of us meeting. Eventually though, he told me that he and his mom were moving up to a city that was about an hour and a half away from me. He started begging me to see him and go to a movie, anything. I had to break the catfishing truth and say those were not pictures of me, but of someone else. He was furious. He had been looking forward to a different type of child this whole time. Dave forgave me a few days later though, saying, quote, I still want to meet you because I love you. All the things you say to a young girl to get her to swoon. I think back now and I'm like, wow, I was 13. So I told my best friend everything I just explained above, and that I wanted her to go with me to meet him. There was a whole plan about him driving to see me and going to the movies to finally meet what I thought was the love of my life. I had been brainwashed into believing that this was normal. I didn't tell my mom, of course, and honestly she didn't even notice any of it was going on to begin with. So, the day my friend and I were going to, quote, meet up with Dave, her mom came and picked us up from school. She said something that made my stomach drop into nothingness. She said, Chrissy, you're not going to the movies. You're not going to meet that man. You're going to get seriously hurt or kidnapped, and I can't allow you guys to go. I cried and cried because I honestly thought I could handle anything and be just fine. She told me she wasn't going to tell my mom. I had to promise to never speak to him again and never plan to meet a stranger online. He ended up showing up and was upset that I wasn't there. He went on AIM flying off the handle like I hadn't seen at that age. It scared me. It scared me how close I was to this man being near me. I never talked to Dave again, but I easily believe I would have been kidnapped or worse that day if my best friend's mom hadn't stepped in. My mom would have been none the wiser, and I was none the wiser. But I'm here today, and I learned a dire lesson. I was on a 41-foot sailboat in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay with about 7 other men. We were doing a shakedown/chest cruise, and we planned to be out for about 12 hours. This was also in the mid-1980s, so there wasn't as reliable of weather prediction resources as there are today. We got caught in a tropical storm with winds gusting into the 50-mile-per-hour range, just short of a weak hurricane. We had just barely managed to rig some storm hawsers and storm sails because the one fellow on board who was the best sailor since the storm was almost on us otherwise we probably would have died. During the storm itself, I still expected to die at any time. In fact, we made one of those security calls on the radio. If you've had time at sea, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's not that important. For what seemed like 15 minutes, we were in a maelstrom. There was no visibility. But then it passed. We would live. This was at about 3 p.m., and although there was cloud cover, of course, the ambient light was such that you could see 2 miles or so in any direction. If you're familiar with the sea, you know that such storms like these, particularly in shallower depths near land masses, dredge a lot of things off the sea floor. Here's the sighting. We're all on deck, working lines, checking damage, etc., and the bay around us is choppy and churning and foaming. Old-timey sailors often use the saying, "the sea is confused." I look about 15 minutes off the starboard side and something swims to the surface, breaks the surface, looks at us, and then submerges again. It was like a thin man with a humanoid shape. Their arms articulated like a man, and they had a human head, but its skin was covered in scales like a snake. It looked at us, blinked its weird, heavy-lidded eyes, and then dove back under. So, maybe you need to know a few things about me at that moment. No drugs, no alcohol, no injuries. I was elated because I was glad to be alive, but my senses in that situation were sharpened, not dulled. I had, at that time, about 6 years' experience on ships and fishing boats, and had seen squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks, skates, etc., all around the world. I was not the type of guy to see a patch of seaweed and call it a sea monster. I made an instant decision that I was not going to say anything. What could I say? I just saw a strange creature, take my word for it. The men on this boat were all mechanics and engineers and professionals. Why get a reputation as a flake? At the time, it was important for all of us to get D-Skipper or OOD qualifications, and saying something like that would be really frowned upon. And as I stood there in my life vest soaking wet, hooked onto the steel lifeline, glad to be alive, one of the other sailors, who was a USN captain, with over 30 years of experience in the surface navy, piped up and said, "I just saw a brown thing pop up on the surface. It looked like a lizard man, with a scaly face. It blinked at us with these big eyes and then just went back under." "Yeah, I saw it too," I said. No one else said that they had seen it. Then we sailed back to the pier later that day and didn't speak of it again. I had never witnessed that level of destruction and devastation before. The eye of the storm hit around 10:30 p.m., so most of the guests, including myself, were sheltered in the hotel ballroom. What made this storm unique, and the reason it caught the southern Baja Peninsula so off guard, was the fact that it rapidly intensified and changed course. It was originally forecasted to head west and weaken as it went out to sea, but instead it made almost a 90-degree turn and headed directly for Cabo San Lucas as a Category 4. It was Category 3 when it actually made landfall, but the millibars of pressure in the eye were extremely low for a Category 3, and the hurricane slowed and caused massive destruction. Because of the initial forecast, people were not being encouraged to evacuate. Our hotel was prepared as possible and technically designated as a hurricane shelter with the ability of a Cat 3 storm, and we had excellent safety procedures in place. But no one expected the storm to be as bad as it was. The hotel had a shelter set up in the hotel ballroom, but also told guests that if they felt more comfortable staying in their rooms, that they were more than welcome to do so, so long as they kept the windows and doors completely shut and did not venture outside. At the point of their original instruction, the hurricane was still not expected to be such a massive threat. My friends and I originally thought that we would, quote, "write it out" in our hotel room, and we were almost poking fun at the evacuation room that was set up. We figured that we would hole up in our room with food and wine and watch movies until the government formally shut down the power grid, as planned and mentioned in the bulletins that they were sending us. Everything was going, quote, as planned for us until about 8:30 p.m. The sliding glass doors were shaking violently, and then all of a sudden a large portion of a palm tree snapped off and hit our window. It didn't shatter, fortunately, but the scare was enough for us to put all of our things in the bathroom, grab our passports and wallets, and make a beeline for the hotel ballroom. At that point in our room, there was water already starting to gurgle and getting sucked out of the toilet, and the shower was making a howling noise. Because the hotel hallways were partially outside and exposed to the elements, it also took us 3 hours to pull the hotel door open because of the low pressure suction. By the time we made it to the hotel ballroom, the hotel staff was already running rescue operations to retrieve people from their rooms. They were taking attendance on their hotel room roster and rescuing accordingly. There was an elderly couple being carried in with blood all over them, being cut by glass and some other injuries. None of them were really major, thanks to the incredible care and rescue effort of the hotel staff. The pictures on the link below will tell the story of the destruction, but the main reason I felt that this was an important story to share was because Odile was a storm that took everyone by surprise. We were incredibly lucky to be in the care of the hotel workers who slaved away all night to keep us safe, but a lot of people were not so lucky, and a widespread destruction over the Baja Peninsula was immense. So, for anyone else who doubts the power of Mother Nature and doesn't take weather warnings seriously, just take some advice from anyone who's experienced Odile. Weather forecasts can change in a heartbeat, so always err on the side of caution. We were stranded in Cabo for an extra week because the airport was completely destroyed. There was no phone service, internet, or any form of communication. Our friends and family actually feared the worst after they didn't hear from us for several days. And the Mexican military had to perform food drops for the local residents because all of the roads were washed out. I could write a book about all the experiences of that week, but I'll let my photos do the talking. Needless to say, I made some lifelong friends during that week, and I saw things that I couldn't imagine even in my wildest dreams. Mother Nature is beautiful and amazing, but give her respect before it's too late and she demands it from you. Yellowstone National Park in October of 2015. I'm kind of an avid amateur photographer, and one night around 4 a.m. I was out alone in the Firehole Basin region of the park. The goal was to take a long exposure photo of a geyser erupting, with the Milky Way stretching through the sky overhead. The photo turned out to be pretty much a bust. When geysers erupt, they blow massive amounts of steam into the air, and steam kind of blurs the whole beautiful night sky situation. But anyway, I parked my car and hiked a ways to get closer to the geyser I wanted to photograph. Then I set up my tripod, adjusted all the settings, and waited for the eventual eruption. The night was crystal clear, perfectly quiet, and very cold. As my ears grew accustomed to the lack of sound, I gradually realized I could hear the gentle burbling of the spring that gives birth to the Firehole River, some distance behind me. I could hear wind in the trees and leaves rustling across the ground. In front of me, I could hear rumbling and hissing from deep within the earth as the White Dome geyser worked itself up for another eruption. An owl hooted somewhere above me, and I could even hear the distant howls of the wolves across the bowl of the Midway Valley below. As my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, I could see the Milky Way stretched like a river of light from horizon to horizon overhead. 1 billion stars shined above, brilliant and cold. Orion hung over my right shoulder, and Venus burned just above the horizon, so bright it almost hurt to look directly at it. And then behind me, loud and sudden, the pounding footsteps of a giant, clearly coming right at me. Bear? Bigfoot? Some hideous monster born in hell of a geyser's boiling mouth spewed upon the land to wreak vengeance? I didn't know, but I knew it was coming, and I knew it was close. The buffalo actually brushed against me as he walked past. I was frozen in place, resigned to my fate. A huge bull, a mountain of fur and horns, shambling up out of the darkness, steam billowing from its nostrils in the cold, dry air. It really felt like a close encounter with a freight train. He just strode past like I didn't even exist, seemed to tiptoe gently around my tripod, then stopped about 10 feet in front of me and took a long, slow, very satisfying, steaming piss on the ground. Then he grunted and went on his way. And at that point, I just stood there wondering how I was even going to take a photo if the geyser blew before my hands stopped shaking. Edit. I dug around a little and found the photo I ended up with that evening when the geyser finally got around to erupting. Like I said, the steam pretty much scrambled the star field, but I caught a lucky break with the shooting star. I have this friend, I'll just use his first letter, R, who I believe has been stalking me for the past 2 weeks, if not longer. I'll give some background info, then get into the problem I'm in. Thanks in advance for any advice and help. We met back in 2014 in high school. He was always quiet, but was a nice and easygoing guy. We grew very close and I saw him as a brother. He didn't have a very smooth childhood. He saw his parents argue a lot, often for years, and his mom even cheated on his dad, and he saw the effect it had on him and the whole family. But you wouldn't suspect anything out of the ordinary just meeting him at first. Around 2016, he started to become a bit paranoid and would seem a bit pessimistic at times. He never had many friends, but neither did I for that matter. We had 2 other friends together that we saw often, and we were the only ones that he trusted. I saw him have this strange panic attack where he ran out of a restaurant we were at, and he ran to a nearby park and yelled at people. I called his dad to come get him, and he got him in the car and gave him a pill. Apparently, this had been the second time this happened recently then. Fast forward to June 2021. In between that last episode and now, ours seemed normal as could be, but I noticed he was a bit off and has been since then. He met a girl in college months before that he says he fell madly in love with, but she rejected him when he asked her on a date and blocked him on everything right after graduation. It took a massive toll on his emotional and mental state. He had another episode where he ran outside his house and actually provoked someone, and they punched him in self-defense. And then his parents took him to the hospital during that summer, and he was officially diagnosed with schizophrenia. So, from late 2021 until now, I've noticed he's quieter. He still cracks jokes, and you can have a decent conversation with him, and he still seems like a nice guy. But there's some stuff recently that I truly think is alarming, and this is why I'm making this post. So, I'll cut to the chase. For the last 6 weeks, we've hung out 3 times. This was actually after a hiatus where we didn't see each other since February this year, because I started working more hours and went to the night shift. Each of those 3 hangouts I've noticed he looks at me in a really strange way, like he's horny and imagining me naked, or imagining himself hurting me. We're both male, heterosexual, and I'm saying this to preface for what I'll mention in a bit. He also mentions that he's still in love with that girl from school, but then proceeds to call her a slut, a whore, and wants to rape and kill her right after. He has said this numerous times and even mentions going to the elementary school that she goes to. He sent me a picture of that school on Google Maps with arrows pointed at it and firework emojis last week. He also admitted to having parked outside of her home and sitting there for hours about 5 times back in 2021. For the past week, he's been insisting on hanging out several times a day, and when I was at Chili's with my parents on Saturday, he sent me a message saying, quote, "Chili's." He's able to see me since I'm on the Snap Map on Snapchat, since I use the app often to talk to other friends. When I went to the mall right after, he said, quote, "You're going to the mall again? You went there yesterday." Which is true. I went to the mall twice, once with my mom, and then with both of my parents the day later to get some stuff since one of our favorite stores was closing, so we wanted to check out the good deals. On the drive home that day, he messaged me saying, "You didn't work today, we should have hung out." I replied, "Maybe Wednesday," which was actually yesterday since writing this post. I didn't see him because I'm genuinely creeped out. So the day after that, on Sunday, he again insisted on seeing me, but I went to go play some soccer instead with other friends, and then I went to go do some laundry after that. And when I was at the laundromat, he sent me a soccer ball emoji and a laundry emoji indicating he saw me on the Snap Map. Here's the thing. He keeps mentioning where I am, and it's always within 10 minutes of me being on my phone. He's actually done this for the last 2 years, but never this frequently. It used to be like twice a month, and I brushed it off, but now I'm noticing something actually concerning. He's also been calling me, quote, "boyfriend," and sending heart emojis the past week, and when I told him that I was going to see him this week, which I won't, but I said so just to not make him mad because I'm actually fearful of him hurting me or others, he said, "You think I can wait that long to see my boyfriend?" This past Sunday, I didn't reply to him for 4 hours, and he kept asking me if I'm mad, and then said he wants me to reply no longer than a minute after he texts me each time. I have a feeling that he's just consistently on his phone looking for when I'm active on social media, and I don't really know why. He also admitted to me a month ago that he makes fake profiles to be able to gain access to that one girl's Instagram and look at her pictures, and he says that he masturbates to them. He even uses those nudity apps to take her clothes off. All of this is concerning. He currently doesn't have a job and hasn't had one for the last 2 years. I'm the only friend he sees and talks to, and I feel like he's developed a compulsion or fixation or dependence or a mix of all 3 on me. And as I mentioned, he has said that he wants to rape and kill that girl that used to be in his class, and he knows where she lives and knows where she works. I have not mentioned my thoughts on this to him again out of fear. He currently takes medication daily, and he said that he's been seeing a new therapist for just over a month now, but I don't know if any of those things are even working or true. I'm asking for any advice on how to approach this and what to do. My concern is that if I tell anyone like the police or the girl, he'll find out and retaliate by hurting me or my family, as he knows where I live. Any help on this is appreciated. Hey all, so this just happened this morning. It was super weird and unsettling, and I would love to hear people's opinions and what I should do if it happens again. I usually take the bus to my work, and the bus drops me off about 15 minutes walking distance. In that time I play Pokemon Go. I intended to walk to some of the Pokestops that are on my way to work. I got off the bus and a couple people get off as well, including this one older man, maybe about 65 years old. I started walking on autopilot on the sidewalk next to the road, but then I remembered the Pokestops and pivoted around and switched my direction by almost 90 degrees. This old guy who had been walking behind me going the same direction that I was notices I started going the other way. He immediately changes his direction too and starts following behind me again. I turned into the small strip mall that hosted the Pokestops I wanted to go to and see the first one. So I walk up to it and stop and chill for a few minutes collecting stuff from the stop and catching a couple Pokemon that had popped up. He passes me acting like he's just going about his business, but then stops in front of a store about 30 feet away from where I'm standing and starts looking into the windows. Keep in mind, all these stores are closed at this point, and it's 6 a.m. He has no phone in his hand, so I know he's not playing Pokemon Go, and he keeps glancing back at me as I keep my eye on him. He eventually walks off and disappears around the corner, as the whole strip mall was kind of curved, so it was easy for him to disappear from my vision. I walk in the direction he went to get to the next Pokestop, and I pass a wall on my right. As I pass the wall, he sees me and starts following behind me again. At this point, I'm pretty weirded out, so I don't stop at any of the Pokestops and just keep walking and collecting the items as I pass, all while he's following behind me. I was worried I was just being overly paranoid and decided to test to see whether or not he was following me. I stopped at the last Pokestop at the strip mall and dilly-dally on my phone for a few. And he does the same thing again, where he waits for me and starts following me again as I pass. I give him a very dirty look when I look behind me, and then speed walk to the office complex that was on the other side of the street from my job, as I didn't want him to know where I worked. I sat down at these secluded benches they have in front of them where a Pokestop was at. I never saw him again after that, but when I get off the bus tomorrow, I'm definitely going to be filming. If he does it again, I'll post it in the comments. Creepy guy following me to work? Let's not meet again. My first hurricane was Hurricane Gloria. I was 4 or so and I don't really remember it. I was living in Connecticut and moved soon after. We had no power for a week and a lot of tree branches fell down. We had to shower at the gym for a week. This wasn't very traumatic. I was a kid and it wasn't too bad for me. When I was an adult, I moved to New York City for Sandy. I didn't think it would be so bad until it was. I got emergency supplies at the last minute, flashlights and batteries. I filled my bathtub with water in case I needed to flush the toilet, and that stopped being possible. I got gallons of drinking water for me, and I got things that wouldn't spoil if worst case the power went out. I made sure that I wasn't in a flood zone either. In an act of extreme paranoia, I got a dog carrier that was a backpack in case I needed to move my dog fast. I didn't realize what good shape I was in for the hurricane. I was not living in a basement yet, and I was in a sturdy building not in a flood zone. It was mostly scary because everyone was getting really jumpy, and I had decided to stay alone with my dog because I certainly wasn't leaving her anywhere. I was single, so it was just us. I powered up my laptop in case I wanted to watch a movie to stay calm, whether or not I lost power. I downloaded one, and this was actually my worst choice. I picked The Never-Ending Story. Not too many spoilers if you've never seen this fantastic film, but it centers around a terrifying magical storm, quote, the Nothing, that is literally eating the universe until there's nothing left. Bessie, my dog, and I slept on the floor together where I moved all of my blankets. I watched the wind mile-per-hour gauge, and when it went down close to 25, I got her out the front door to pee. Then we were locked up again for a really long time. When it was all over, I realized how lucky I was. Places by the water were decimated. We just had debris. People lost their homes and businesses and were hurt and are still dealing with the fallout. One amazing thing is how the city cares. When I called to volunteer to help, I couldn't even get to an area that was really damaged. They said that they had too many people out there helping already. I just volunteered on the Lower East Side with people who couldn't leave their homes to get food for reasons like maybe their elevators were out because of power. There were about 20 people in my group. Every disaster is like this any place. People are afraid. Some people come out okay and others are flattened. In some really big disasters, almost no one is okay. No one spends some disasters being afraid watching a movie. It's really important to help people in situations like this who can't help themselves. It doesn't matter who they are or where it is. Disasters can happen any place, and probably will more because of global warming. A disaster could happen to you, and if it does, you'll appreciate the help. I went to this kind of outdoor education boarding school when I was 14 or 15 in the Victorian Alps in Australia. We hiked the mountains in that area almost every weekend, usually doing 2 to 3 night hikes, sometimes longer. We had heard from teachers and locals that there were hermits in the mountains who lived in shacks or drifted between the old cattlemen huts. We just brushed them off though as stupid stories that the teachers would tell you to spook you. However, we did this one hike at the tail end of winter that kind of led me to believe that there actually were hermits living out in the mountains. Basically, we were doing this 4-day hike, and it was super gloomy, foggy, and cold the whole hike. The Victorian Alps are famous for their cattlemen's huts, which are all over the high country. We would hike from hut to hut, but rarely stayed in them because it was one of the school's rules. So, we were hiking on the second day on this steep ridge, and it was mega foggy and cold. You couldn't see into the valley, only down the sloping edges of the ridge. When you're hiking long distances, you don't really talk the whole way, and since it was miserable, we all just had our heads down walking straight. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a big dog about 50 meters down the side of the ridge. It wasn't a dingo, because it was jet black and had a collar on. It looked kinda like a border collie. I had only just registered it was a dog in my mind when I swear I saw a man walking behind the dog. He looked homeless and was looking up at us. Bear in mind, it was really foggy, and this guy was darting in and out of trees. I turned around and told my mate I saw a dude and his dog on the trail below. He was still visible, so I pointed him out, and my mate freaked out a little too, and told everyone else to look as well. In the moment of getting my group, which was 6 guys, to stop hiking and all look, he was gone. Everyone other than myself and my mate who saw him shrugged it off as a day hiker and his dog. We joked it was a hermit, but didn't speak about it much after that. We arrived at our campsite, which was the Vallejo Gartner hut. We couldn't stay in the hut, so we set up camp on the flat ground around it. We set up, cooked dinner, and got ready to sleep. I didn't think much about the man and the dog I saw earlier, but now it was getting dark and it kinda crept into my mind. There's this awesome toilet at this hut that overlooks the valley below. Honestly, an awesome shitter. It was almost dark and I needed to shit, so I headed to the loo. As I was sitting there and looking at the view, I was feeling a little creeped out. I don't know why. Now, one thing to note is that these huts are all covered in scribbles and people's names, little sayings, etc. Like literally every square inch is covered in something. So of course, you never really read anything on the walls if you stay at these huts like every weekend. Though, as I reached for the toilet paper, these words literally jumped out at me. Run. 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 He's coming. Run. I never wiped my ass faster. Combined with what I had seen earlier and my creepy feeling, I just bolted out of the bathroom into my tent. The guy that I was tenting with was actually the one who had also seen the dude, so I told him what I saw in the bathroom. We both became pretty paranoid and just sort of laid there for hours not making a sound. Eventually, though, I went to sleep. Shit really gets weird when the next day we woke up to find huge portions of our food missing. We keep the food in the outside bits of our tents and our hiking packs, and then inside zipped bags too. Half of my group's outside tent flies were undone with the packs open, and food bags were strewn all over the ground. We thought it was a wombat originally, but the bags were literally unzipped and our hiking packs had buckles to open them. My thinking was the dude I saw earlier was a hermit and followed us to our camp and stole our food that night. Honestly, creepiest shit I've ever experienced. A really good friend of mine known as Damo was an avid fisherman, and he and his dad used to go out sea fishing whenever they could. A few years ago he told me this story and it creeped the hell out of me, so this seems like an appropriate place to tell it now. Damo and his dad were on the second night of a deep-sea fishing trip, and they decided to get some sleep early in the evening so they could go for whatever fish they were after around 1 a.m., which was apparently the best time to get this fish. Anyway, they only had a smallish boat, but the weather was extremely pleasant, and the sea was calm to the point of stillness, so they figured it would be a great night to fish for them. Around 12:30 a.m., they started to set their gear up, and as they were on the starboard side getting the bait ready, they heard a loud splash on the port side. As there was almost no swell, they figured it was either a large fish or some gear that had somehow fallen in, so they went over to have a look. Floating face up in the water only a few feet from the side of the boat was a young woman. They reckon she couldn't have been more than about 30 at most. She showed absolutely no signs of decomposition or bloating, and there was nothing tangled in her hair. She was wearing a simple white skirt and a blue-colored strappy top, both of which were, quote, clean and apparently looked barely wet. All indications that she had only just gone in the water. She showed no signs of, quote, damage like having been beat or attacked, and her eyes and mouth were shut. Damo said she looked totally peaceful and like she was simply asleep and just floating on her back in the water. They were both totally freaked out by the whole thing, but reacting more to the need to make sure that she was okay, instead of just standing there trying to work out where she came from. They tried to wake her up by shouting at her, and they threw a line to her hoping that they may catch her enough to pull her in. She showed absolutely no signs of movement, and the splashing around that they were making with the rope served only to let her body drift further away from the boat. When she was a few meters away, Damo ran off to get a fishing rod, hoping they could pull her in that way, and his dad ran to the cabin to try and call the Coast Guard for help. When Damo got back to the side, she had vanished. He frantically searched around and splashed into the water with the rod, thinking she had bobbed underwater or even drifted under the boat somehow, but the body had just vanished. Eventually his dad, figuring they couldn't just leave a potential dead or unconscious body floating out in the water, jumped in and swam over to where she had last been, hoping he may find her under the surface, but they couldn't find anything. They did eventually drive the boat around in a good half-kilometer circle, but they never saw the body again. The Coast Guard did come out, and obviously Damo and his dad were kind of interrogated to make sure they hadn't murdered or dumped the body, but nothing came of it at all. The freakiest thing about it all was the boat was thoroughly checked before they had set out fishing for the day, so they could say with certainty that there had been no woman on board when they set off. The apparently, quote, fresh state of the body kind of removed the possibility that she had been in the water a while, and that they had just found the body, and that they were far enough out from land, and nowhere near any other boats, that her appearance there was just totally unexplainable, as was the way the body just disappeared. Damo and his dad hadn't been gone more than 20 seconds from the side of the boat, but in that time the body just completely vanished. They were both really shaken by the whole thing, and were most terrified by the fact that her appearance was preceded by the heavy splash in the water, to them suggesting the body had only just entered the water from their own boat. They tell the story now as a kind of, you won't believe what happened to us type of thing, but it shook them badly, and neither have been back to the same fishing spot since. I've played WoW since release day, World of Warcraft if you don't know, and up until 2 years ago when my first daughter was born, I still did. I met my husband because of that game, and have had 2 babies. That game saved me from the cruel reality that I was forced to endure at the hands of my father. I was safe in this virtual world, away from his sick perversions and harsh words and actions. Or so I thought. I loved to raid a lot, I mean religiously, and as a 16-year-old girl playing a game dominated by men, I got a lot of attention, 90% of it being negative. This is one of those, although I didn't think so at first. My guild and I were raiding, and our main tank was sick, so we were low a body. We found a new tank from a sister guild and began our raid night. I was a healer and was assigned to set new tank. He was super nice and very talkative. We talked a lot that night, even long after the raid had ended. We even went so far as to exchange MySpace info and email. His name in-game was Riser, so that's what I always called him. My name in-game was Chastity, so that's what he always called me. We never used our real names, and now I'm so very glad we didn't. We talked forever, and I was thrilled to discover he lived not 25 minutes away. Now, seeing as I was a 16-year-old girl, I posted way too much information on MySpace. Way too much. Keep that in mind. Riser and I talked for weeks and weeks, and he was so nice and even helped me through a tough breakup. We talked on the phone until the wee hours of the morning, and he listened to me cry and offered kind advice to a very lonely, very stupid teenage girl. Keep in mind that he said he was 27 at the time. Looking back at this, I now realize how creepy it was becoming a lot earlier than I noticed it back then. He started flirting, and I must admit I flirted with him a bit too. Then he got sexual, and as a 16-year-old I lived for attention. And then his sexual emails got slightly violent. One incident in particular that I remember was an email that he sent me where he told me in graphic detail how he would like to rip me so hard that his man parts would rip through my cervix so he could feel the inside of my womb. Stupidly, even after reading that, I still talked to him. One day, after walking my dog through the park, I returned home to the phone ringing off the hook. No one was home, which was normal as both of my parents worked a lot, so I answered it. It was him. The first thing he said was,
"I saw you today. You're so cute."
He then proceeded to describe my dog, everything I was wearing, and even my makeup. I said, rather shakily, "Oh, why didn't you say hi? I didn't see you." He said,
"Oh, I didn't want to scare you. You'd know me if you saw me. I have a lot of scars, mostly on my neck."
Even back then, in all of my stupidity, I started to get scared. I said, "Yeah, from what?" His reply was way too happy when he said,
"From glass."
All I remember next was hearing him say,
"Can I come in?"
I slammed the phone down and grabbed two of the biggest knives in the kitchen. I grabbed my dog, who was a 200-pound St. Bernard, and hauled her into my room. As I was barricading my room, I heard someone pounding on the front door. The pounding continued for what seemed like hours, until it got dark. I jumped at every single noise I heard until my mom got home. I never answered any more of his phone calls or emails after that, though he sent me tons and emailed me several hundred times a day. I'm so glad I didn't open that door. I was walking around my neighborhood alone once, enjoying the night air and watching the stars. There was this little pond near my house, with a wooded area that had trees, a bench, and a rope swing that went out over the water. I sat down on the bench to look at the stars, and I heard some rustling off to my right, towards the trees. Bears weren't uncommon from where I was from, so I took out my flashlight and shone it around over there. I didn't see anything. It freaked me out, so I kept my flashlight on and my senses aware, but I stayed on the bench to mull over my thoughts and watch the sky some more. I don't really know why I did that, because that's typical horror movie shit. Anyway, a few minutes pass and I hear nothing more, so I lean back into the bench and start to relax a bit. I'm staring up at the sky with my flashlight pointed downwards, so as not to create any light pollution. That's when I noticed something in the tree in my peripheral vision. I couldn't really tell what it was, but the branch was swaying slightly, and the rustling noise was back too. I immediately sat up and stared at it, but hadn't shown my flashlight at it yet in case of pissing off some huge bird or something else. I don't think I've ever been that scared before in my life. I remember my heart was beating so fast and I could taste blood even. I stared at it for what seemed like forever, and it slowly stopped moving, but the shape was still there. Bears do climb trees sometimes, so I was hesitant to run away in case that's what it was, so I just kept staring at it. After a while, I mustered up my little raisin-ass kahunas to shine my goddamn light at the tree. It was a man. A fucking man, there in the tree, crouched like some silent naked monkey. He had no expression on his face, but his eyes were open really, really wide. When my light landed on him, he started to move like he was going to come down, but I didn't stick around to see if he did. I jumped the bench and ran for the fucking hills. I ran to my house, around to the back door, and locked myself in without looking back once. I went around and made sure every window and door was locked, and I even checked the attic. I never go out alone anymore. As I've said in previous posts, I work at sea. Last month we came into dry dock to carry out some refit and repairs. Dry dock is when a ship is brought into a lock, the gates closed, and all the water is pumped out, leaving the ship high and dry, quote, on the blocks, thus allowing repairs and inspections to be made, especially the underside of the hull. Next to us was an old military frigate being broke down for scrap. She arrived about 2 weeks prior to us. Once the frigate was on the blocks and dry, all of the crew left the old girl to her fate. It was a sad sight, but that's how these things go. Once all of the sensitive stuff had been removed, the dock workers were free to go on. The dock foreman, John, went on board first with a camera to take pictures of the work areas. He took a couple of hundred all in all. This was one of them. He later sent all of the pics to his boss, who upon seeing this one called John straight away asking, "Who is the guy with the axe at the edge of the camera flash?" John had no idea. He never saw anyone. The area where this picture was taken was in a cross alleyway, deep inside the ship. He was going around with a torch and a camera. When he'd go to take a picture, he would turn off the torch, leaving him in total darkness, and snap the shot. He would then turn the torch back on and be on his way. Due to the fact that it was a military vessel, the police were called. A search was indeed carried out, but no one was found. There was only one way on and off the ship, and that was by a gangway covered by CCTV. You couldn't just jump over the side of the ship, as it was a 25-meter drop onto concrete. No one was seen to leave the ship after John had taken this. I'm a skeptic. Maybe it's a trick of the flash reflecting off something, but if you really zoom in, you can just make out the fucker's face, ear, collar of his jacket, and the fucking axe in a meaty fucking fist. Now, it could be John blowing smoke up my ass, but when he was telling the story, he seemed genuinely rattled, and the guy in the pic looks nothing like any of the other workers we met at the dock. If there's someone here who's handy with cleaning up pictures, I'd really be interested to see what you can pull out of it. And before anyone asks, I'm not going to name the ship or even where she is, as I'm not sure if I'm even supposed to have a picture of the innards of a military vessel. This gave me serious goosebumps. Needless to say, I did not go on board for a look. When I was very little, like 5 or 6, my dad used to take me on all sorts of adventures through nature, especially when we owned a little cottage up in the Scottish Highlands. Now, my dad is sort of a combo Irish bloke, Yorkshire laddie type of fellow, and very spry, despite him being about 55 at the time. And on this particular occasion, he decided we were going to go hiking way up into the cliffs. I was quite happy with this development, as it meant a piggyback ride for at least 90% of the difficult bits. This was a proper trek. He wanted to get to one of the highest bluffs so we could have an amazing 360-degree view of the gorgeous meadows and some sparkling sea. But after we reached the top plains, where it's all short, wind-whipped grass and you can see for miles, he suddenly turned very still and very quiet. When you're small, your parents are gods, so seeing your dad look frightened is scarier than anything your own mind can come up with. So I was pulling on his arm and going, "What? What?" My mom is epileptic, and I saw her fits when I was a kid, so I thought it was happening to him too, or something similar, and I wouldn't know what to do because we're up on this huge cliff with no one else around. When just as fast as he started, he snapped out of it. He fireman lifted me right up and just started striding away without a word. Over his shoulder, I could see a big, pale yellow object stuck into the ground like an obelisk. I know now that this was a refrigerator. When I was older and I asked my dad about it, he stiffened up and told me that when he was a boy in the 50s, he and his little friends had found an old-style fridge in the woods, and being little boys, they opened it. Well, of course, they found a body. Another child, who by whichever means had found themselves in the fridge and unable to get out. My dad had never mentioned anything before, which leads me to believe that he either witnessed a very decomposed or skeletonized individual, but I can't ask him. Remember that episode of The Simpsons where they unlock Homer's PTSD and it turns out he found a dead body when he was a teenager? My dad grew increasingly uncomfortable the first time we saw that episode, and he excused himself to the kitchen before the ending. My dad has seen some gnarly shit, but for whatever reason he will not discuss anything further about this dead child in the fridge, only that it happened. So when he explained, I assumed it was the trauma, and I said something like, "Oh Dad, that's awful. So when you saw the fridge up there, it bring up the old memories?" And he honestly looked at me with his big blue eyes like I was an idiot. I'll never forget it. "No, Amy," he said in a very low tone. "It was because it was the same fridge." I was about 23, a British girl backpacking around the States alone. I'd been to NYC and taken the Amtrak down the East Coast and around Florida, with a ticket to fly out to Baton Rouge. I got to New Orleans and checked into the not-so hostel, and was tired so I crashed. I woke up the next day, did some touristy stuff, and generally relaxed. I had over a week of vacation time, so I was in no hurry. I was vaguely aware of the weather forecast, but didn't think it was really a big deal. The next day, the hostel put up a sign saying, quote, "Katrina is coming. Hurricanes mean party time in New Orleans. Get some beer, food, and water, and we'll board up the windows." I was still not worried at all. I went to the supermarket and stocked up. Someone in my dorm was trying to leave the city and found out that there was no buses or planes. The next day, there was a news report, from the mayor, I think, who said everyone had to leave the city or go to a shelter. I still wasn't worried. A shelter seemed like it wouldn't be a big deal. So I packed up my stuff with about a dozen other backpackers and went to the corner where we had been told to wait. A bus picked us up and took us to the Superdome. At first it was cool. There were loads of people, but it was pretty organized and it seemed like an interesting new experience. I stuck with the other backpackers. We were pretty much the only white people in there, which seemed strange for us, but not bad. There were guards, but they were quite chilled. Everyone was really worried about protecting the AstroTurf, so we were really careful where we walked. We set up camp on the bleachers and went to sleep for the night. The storm started about 6 and woke us up. It was incredibly loud and ripped off bits of the roof. It was scary, but eventually it was over. I remember seeing beams of sunlight shining through the holes in the roof. That was day 2. Then things started to get scary. I remember waking up to hear a woman screaming and yelling, "My baby! Someone raped my baby!" There were a lot of unwell people. I've no idea if it actually happened or if it was a mental health symptom. People were coming down off of drugs, and I think I saw someone fall or jump off of one of those balconies. Every day more soldiers came in, with big, scarier guns. There were fights and the whole place just felt scary. There was no running water, and we were using toilets until they had shit heaped over the seats. We were trying to arrange to be transported out, so we went to meet with one of the army guys in charge. We went downstairs under the bleachers, where they had been keeping all the really old and sick people. They were sitting in wheelchairs in 6 inches of water, and several seemed not far away from dying. After that, I stopped complaining and got on with it. After 6 days, they moved us to the basketball stadium for a night, then one of the big hotels. Every day they said that they'd be getting us out today, and then we would have to stay anyway. Finally, they got us on a bus. They wouldn't tell us where we were going, but we all didn't really care at that point. I remember the bus driver being the nicest man, though. I remember when we were given the MRE meals and spent ages talking about food and what we missed. Then we were on the bus and we crossed the, quote, "Welcome to Texas" sign. And right there was a picnic/barbecue place at the side of the road. We were talking about how amazing barbecue food would be, not realizing that they had set it up for us. From that day on, Texas was my favorite state. We got taken to Dallas after then, and the embassy put us up in a hotel for the night and brought me waffles and some clothes. There's more, but it's late here now and I can't really think. If anyone's interested, ask questions and I'll try to answer them. One night, my friend and I decided to hike to the top of this small mountain for a meteor shower. There were 4 of us, all around 16 at the time, and thought it would be really cool. We drove over and started hiking. We took a break about halfway when we noticed there was this guy following us, in a business suit. We were weirded out, so we decided to start back up and walk a bit faster. But by the next time we stopped, he was like 10 feet away, So we bit the bullet to see if he'd just walk by. He didn't. He stopped and asked if we were there for a meteor shower, and if he could walk with us. I found it really weird that a 30-something-year-old man in a suit wanted to hike with 4 16-year-olds, but whatever. As we were walking, my friend and I noticed he was walking really close to our friend, the only girl in the group, like he could smell her shampoo close. We got to the top, sat down, and he sat down almost right up on our friend. With her reasonably freaked out, I made an excuse on why we had to leave early and we promptly booked it the fuck out of there. We were nearly running the entire way down. When we finally got back to the car, we thought, cool, we ditched this weirdo. But no. When we were all in the car, our friend pointed out that this guy is full-on sprinting down the trail and toward our car with a large stick. Being in a car, we just drove out of there very shook up. We chalked it up to some dude on some hell of a drug, but 2 days later we all got a text linking us to a news report about a guy that had strangled his wife and then proceeded to kill another girl later that night on a hiking trail. It was that guy. The same dude at the same hiking trail. We never told our parents about the incident and never went back there again. Ever. Back in 2016, I was a homeless and drug-addicted teen living in one of the worst skid rows in North America. The majority of my days were spent doing anything I could to get my fix, and then using in a park frequented by other vagrants and addicts, just trying to get by during the thick of the opioid epidemic. Most of these people were harmless, friendly even, except this one young man. He seemed normal at first, quiet and mild-mannered, but every so often I'd catch him glaring, and his eyes were dark and almost empty, like a shark's. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up, and I got a really weird feeling in my stomach that something was off with this guy. One day he got into a fight with another kid in the park, and I caught the first glimpse of the monster inside him he was so desperately trying to hide. Fights are never pretty, and I've seen my fair share of them living on the streets, but the rage that exploded from this guy in a mostly verbal brawl was something I'd never witnessed in my entire life. Even in a haze, I could sense there was something terribly wrong going on in this man's head. A few months passed, and by then I found a place to rest my head indoors and was watching the evening news. Turns out my quote gut feeling about this guy was right. He had gone to a neighboring city, stolen booze and a large knife, walked into a high school and ended up murdering a young girl and seriously injuring another. For a while, my mind went through a lot of what-ifs and felt some guilt for not having gone to the authorities with my suspicions. In hindsight, there wasn't really anything I could have told the cops about him besides the off-putting vibe that he gave off, and something tells me they wouldn't have taken a junkie's word seriously anyway. Scary murderer from the park, if you ever get paroled, let's not meet. It was more of a bushwalk, but when I was a teenager I lived in a very long creek trail in empty bushland. It was a beautiful place, very hilly and mountainous area with rainbow lorikeets and a dam nearby. My friend and I headed to the creek after school one day because I wanted to show her a bat colony near the trail. I don't remember if I turned left when I should have turned right or if I turned right when I should have turned left, but either way we never found the colony. This was before smartphones, so we just followed the creek aimlessly for a couple of hours, hoping it would end up somewhere familiar. It was starting to get dark when she first saw it, a flash of red in the bushes. We have rosalias out here, but she swore it wasn't a bird. We heard rustling now and then, which made us walk faster. It was hard to move fast on the terrain because the slope along the creek was just getting steeper and steeper. Embedded in the creek bed were sometimes these huge concrete cylinders, big enough to stand inside of. Some of them had water flowing through them and some didn't. Soon after she saw the red flash, we spotted something else on the other side of the creek. It was one of the big concrete cylinders, but there was stuff inside. I thought it was garbage at first, but it was actually a home. We could make out blankets, a shopping trolley full of miscellaneous items, and newspaper and magazine cutouts hanging off the concrete walls, mostly of girls. We didn't say anything to each other, but we were almost running at this point. We heard rustling now and then, which could have been anything. There's plenty of wildlife in that area of bushland. It was maybe 30 minutes to an hour later when we saw wire fencing, and followed it to some kind of garbage yard in an industrial area. It turns out that we were a 3.5-hour walk from our original starting point. I'm still not 100% sure of what happened that day, other than the fact that my friend was grounded for about a month. My girlfriend and I had driven down an old dirt road that ran beside a lake on one side with mountains on the other. We were looking for unexplored territory to hike in. The dirt road became a trail and eventually was swallowed up entirely by the forest. Once the path became impassable by car, we got out and hiked for quite some time and began making our way back to the car as the sun was going down. It was a challenge getting the car turned around, but I finally managed and we were off. It was slow going as it was a shitty road and getting dark fast. Suddenly, we came to a fork in the path that hadn't been visible coming the other way. Neither of us had any idea whether to go right or left, so I just picked randomly, hoping that both would end up taking us back to the main road. As we rounded a small curve in the road, our headlights fall upon a man dragging a large hockey duffel bag off the trail into the woods. As soon as the lights hit him, he just froze completely still. Driving past him felt like an eternity because we couldn't have been doing more than 5 miles per hour due to the shitty road. My girlfriend and I didn't say a word to each other until we were past him, at which point we were both just like, what the fuck was that? And then the road ended. Just like where we had stopped the first time, the forest had swallowed up this part of the road. We were going to have to turn around and drive by the man with the human-sized duffel bag again. I told my girlfriend to buckle up and hold on tight because at the first sign of trouble, I was going to gun it. We came to the spot where the man was, and he was nowhere to be seen. We eventually made it to the right path and got the fuck out of there. The weirdest thing about it was that there wasn't a vehicle anywhere near this guy for 50 miles in either direction. We would have seen it if there had been. We traveled as far as possible both ways, and there just wasn't a place to pull off the road. How the hell did he get there? Where was he going? And what was in that bag? I moved in with my dad around the age of 11, and to keep in contact with my brother, my dad helped me create an Xbox Live account. I made plenty of friends on Halo 3, Left 4 Dead 2, and Resident Evil 5, and had an amazing group of people that I'm still friends with to this day. The group I made were much older than me with a few exceptions. Some of their kids were also friends, a part of this group, and one of them is actually only 1 day older than me, so he and I became rather close. Overall, I made a lot of amazing memories with these people. There was one problem. About a year or two into being involved with these people, another person randomly rejoined the group. This person was friends with one of them before this, and the others were acquainted with this person as well, but they barely knew them. I've never been great at making friends as I'm awkward, and I say a lot of weird things that make people cringe in desperation. But I'm a pretty nice and friendly person, I think. I added this mysterious person because they also seemed friendly. But I was rather distant because this person also didn't have a mic. This person was also pretending to be a woman. When Halo Reach came out, every single one of us was on that game. We practically dominated SWAT, and this person would often join us. Communication was obviously limited because they lacked a mic, but it also made it easier for them to pretend to be female. Now, I do have a fairly deep voice myself, so a lot of people, even now, still think I'm a boy when playing online. So my instant thought was that maybe this person was just self-conscious over how they sound, or just couldn't afford a mic at the time. So, one morning, this person and I are both online. Everyone else was either still sleeping, or was at work, as it was a weekday. This person and I began messaging each other back and forth, and it started off as a normal, pleasant conversation. Then though, it turned dark. Mind you, that this person was well aware that I was young and inexperienced in life. The person began sending me sexually explicit messages, asking me to show them my, quote, 13-year-old tits. At that moment, I blocked the person. My buddy, who introduced me to the group and is well into his 30s, gets online and I tell him everything that happened. It's obviously a little odd for such a young person to be friends with people several decades older than themselves. They all treated me like a little sister, and this became evident when I told my friend what had happened. He immediately gets defensive and starts messaging that mysterious man that he was no longer allowed to join our group as what he did was disgusting. As everyone in our group began signing on and joining the conversation, we put the pieces together and realized this person was 1, a creep, 2, a liar, and 3, a man. This person had lied about not having a mic and was caught with a mic at a few points during their time in our group. The person speaking was apparently male and then lied about it, saying that the person speaking was, quote, her brother. There was plenty of other proof that people offered up, but that was one of the main ones that I remember. I've had plenty of creepy experiences online, but I think that one was the worst because that person was well aware of my age. When I was 17, my bedroom had a window looking out at my backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this before, and kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning, the natural light would help wake me up. One night, I was up late on my phone with my dog laying in bed next to me. At around 2 a.m., my dog jumped up and started barking at the window. At first, I thought he was just barking at his reflection and told him to stop. But then I realized he was looking at the left side of the window while his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside of the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand. All I could see on the window was the reflection of my bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared of, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside, and turned off the lamp. I then laid down facing the window, and I swear I saw a set of human eyes looking back at me from the left side of the window. I drink a lot of water at night, so I had an empty bottle on my nightstand. I grabbed it and pretended to realize it was empty. I turned on my lamp and acted like I was going to get water. I went to my parents' room and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way anything was out there. I went back to my room and told myself I was just seeing things, and I closed the blinds and turned off my lamp and got some sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I went to take my dog out and decided to check out the pine straw bedding underneath my window. He was visibly disturbed. I did my best to ignore that and remember what my dad said about the floodlights. That worked pretty well, until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found out the bulbs had burnt out completely. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I sleep. I don't want to risk anything being able to see me, and if anything is somehow peeking through my window, I want to know it's there. If there was someone at my window that night, let's not meet. It was Christmas time 1998. I was at home mourning the loss of my girlfriend. She wasn't dead or anything, she was just a damn whore. Anyway, this was in my surf club days. One of the greatest moments of my surf club life was when I got my PADI dive ticket, so I could do diving for the Coast Guard who were in the neighboring building. This was a great moment because it gave me and my immediate family access to the Coast Guard surf club bar. I was popular that year all of a sudden. So there I am bitterly complaining to no one, because they're all drinking at the surf club, about the aforementioned damn whore when my lounge is lit up with blue and red lights. A policeman had driven down the driveway and parked outside and decided that knocking was too hard, so just turned on the lights instead. My father was sitting in the front of the bar laughing at my face when the officer told me to get in the car. There had been a boat accident. 3 guys had taken a boat out and managed to sink it. One had made it to shore and raised the alarm, but he didn't know where his friends were. The commotion had spilled into the bar at the surf club, and it was realized quickly that the on-call diver had been drinking for a few hours. The time is 7 p.m. at this stage. Enter my father. My son is the diver for the surf club. He's at home probably complaining about his damn ex-girlfriend, he proclaimed. I'm guessing, of course, but I would even suspect he would have stood up before declaring that. And with that, I was conscripted. I was on the Coast Guard boat with all of my kit and getting the rundown. A 22-foot boat, stuck anchor, mildly choppy seas, Tanner's Rock, 2 missing. Tanner's Rock was a popular fishing spot, a large rock formation about 30 meters deep that fish tended to gather near. I assume it had a great bar or nightclub or something. I don't really know what attracts fish to stuff. I'm suited up and my game face is on. It's now close to 8 p.m. I'm about to roll backwards into the sea when the skipper says, "Well, I don't see any sharks. Good luck." That bastard. Over I go. They had dropped a rope with a sandbag attached when we got to Tanner's Rock so I could guide myself down. I grab the rope and start descending. The dark closes in around me, and the lights on my helmet and wrist penetrate far less than you would think, and it's much less than I hoped. You can't really crash dive 40 meters down, or you'll get narked pretty hard, and you definitely can't crash surface from 40 meters or you'll get the bends. So, slowly does it. But there's no sound, and it's a closed dark bubble with swaying edges. So, you need to make your mind pay attention to anything other than the shapes in the fucking water. Because you will see them. There are sharks and squids and octopi and demons and witches, all just outside of your line of vision. It's so dark you can't see the surface at all. No stars, no moon. Is that a shark? No, it's fine. Bump. The knots on the rope are 10 meters apart, 3 more to go. Bump. The darkness seems to be getting closer somehow. Bump. Nearly there. The bag has stirred up the bottom a bit, and there's even less visibility now. I didn't see the bottom at first, because the back of the boat came out of the dark at me. It was nose down, stern up, standing at about 45 degrees from the bottom. This was the moment I realized there could be 2 bodies on that boat. The lights now had something to bounce off of, so I could see a little more than I could before, and I started to check the boat. The cabin door was closed, so I knocked. I have no idea what would have happened if they had knocked back, but there was nothing. I had to gently but violently rip the door off and repeat the process for the onboard toilet room, but that was thankfully empty too. I grabbed the EPIR beacon, which was in a plastic bag, meaning it didn't go off, and I had a look at the front of the boat. The anchor had gotten stuck, and the winch was strong enough to pull the front of the boat down. I think the finding was that a wave came over the front and flooded the front section of the boat, and then the winch took over and happily wound the boat to the anchor, and then jammed up on the chain and stopped. I undid the bolt on the anchor, and the boat started to slowly rise. I tied the sandbag rope to the bollard on the front and started the long ascent back into the dark. I started thinking about the 2 missing men, floating around drowned just beyond my sight in the dark, imagining hands reaching out for me, or sharks eating them and looking for more humans. Bump. Check my watch. I have to go slow enough to do a 1 minute per bump. I could do 2, but better safe than sorry. Let me tell you that this is a long-ass minute. Up we go again. Bump again. Timer again. This is easy. You've done it before. Start rising again. Bump. I'm about 10 meters down, and I have heaps of air and an overactive imagination when it all goes to fuck. Beneath me I can see movement. Fast movement. One hand points the light at where the other hand goes for my diver knife. A huge solid object is just below my feet. It hits and slides up my leg, and I realize in horror it's the fucking boat. The boat has risen and the pontoons are expanding as the gas expands too, displacing more water and accelerating the ascent. The boat goes past in a few seconds, and in my relief, I actually laugh. I resheath my knife, and then I realize my mistake. The rope is gone. That damn boat has stolen my rope. So I do what my training tells me to do, and I piss myself. I look at the watch and it's been another minute. I start to rise with no reference points and no guide. After what feels like a year, I surface to the yells and abuse from the Coast Guard trying to figure out what to do with the capsized but now floating boat. I swim over and get back on our boat. We manage to flip the capsized boat, royal we, I didn't do shit, and tow it back to shore. I had to debrief with the police and went to see my dad, still wearing the wetsuit half undone now and with bare feet. I get a Viking hero's welcome. Beer and cheering and much storytelling was had. It turns out that all 3 people got to shore. 2 were close to each other and went home to get drunk, while that 3rd guy raised the alarm. This scared the absolute shit out of me when I was a child. Backstory. Adirondack 46er here. Started when I was around 11 years old. I went to this summer camp in upstate New York called Chingachgook. They take you on 3-day hikes into the high peaks, and this year happened to be my first time hiking to a high peak without my dad, so I was a bit weary. My dad has literally hiked everywhere I can think of, so I never really worried about my safety when we would go together. He absolutely knows what he's doing, and it was usually just the two of us. At this summer camp, they send you out into the Adirondacks in groups of 5 to 7 kids. My group was all preteen girls, led by 2 female counselors, usually between the ages of 17 and 19. For some reason, this is regarded as perfectly safe and legal, and it never occurred to any parents or staff that a group of teenage girls should not go off into the wilderness alone for several days with no cell service. Anyway, we had been hiking in the Great Range area, and we found a lean-to, so we started setting up our camp. As we're cooking our boxed rice later on in the evening by our campsite, one of the counselors spots a bear cub. So obviously, being an 18-year-old girl, she really panicked hard. The counselors were trained in survival skills and all that, but come on, at the end of the day, they're just rich teenagers. She literally just runs away, leaving a group of preteens with one 17-year-old counselor in a mother bear's territory. The cub is sniffing around our food, so we also run off. We returned like an hour later to not only see that our whole camp had been ransacked and all of our food was missing, but also 3 bears. 2 cubs and 1 massive angry brown bear. She was super displeased to see us all wander into her campsite and literally charged after us when we promptly ran away. Honestly, thank fucking God the one counselor we had left happened to have bear spray. All she did was spray it in the bear's general direction, and she ran directly into it. We didn't see her or the cubs again, but they ate all of our food, and like I said, the hikes are 3 days and we had no service. So we basically starved for 3 days, and the runaway counselor still made us hike the Great Range on empty stomachs. Boy, my dad was so pissed when he heard about that story. Hurricane Sandy knocked out power for 7 days in my town. The town sits on the northern shore of Long Island Sound. It had been downgraded to a tropical storm by the time it affected Connecticut. The strongest wind gust recorded by my anemometer was about 47 miles per hour. 1 fatality was reported as a result of a falling tree on a moving car. My biggest concern was flooding in my basement. The generator that I used has a capacity of 7,500 watts. It had enough power for sump pumps, refrigeration, heat and hot water, 1 burner of an electric cooktop, some lights, and battery chargers. It used about 10 gallons of gasoline a day, and its 3-gallon fuel tank needed to be refueled about every 8 to 10 hours. By the second day, my biggest challenge was to find an open gas station to refill portable tanks. It was unnecessary to resort to siphoning fuel from automobiles, but just barely. Fallen trees closed many local roads, and most were cleared within a day or 2. Grocery stores remained closed during the power outage, but we had enough food to carry us through. A TV and DVD player were what we used for entertainment. Cell phones continued to work, but internet and cable were out for as long as the power was out. Trees fell on my property but did almost no damage to the house or autos. For my family, Sandy was a little more than a week-long nuisance. We were fortunate that our house is unlikely to be susceptible to major flooding, and none of the fallen trees landed where they could have caused damage. Coastal areas were much less fortunate, though. A section of town near the beach floods frequently. It sits just a foot or 2 above a mean high tide. Homeowners there know the drill. Before Sandy hit, just about every home had a U-Haul truck out front to load up everything from the first floor. Flooding reached about halfway to the second floor of many homes. Our town marina has just 1 narrow opening to the west. No damage was reported. Across the river, east-facing properties felt the brunt of wind-driven waves and storm surges. Several dozen boats moored in the river ended up wrecked on the shore to the west. I was in grade 9 at a really shitty school. The system there sucked, and it was located in a dangerous area of the city I lived in. I actually just remembered this story because it was so usual for things like this to happen there that for me it was just normal, so I forgot it. But looking back at it now, I realized that it's really not normal. So I was in PE class and we were running laps around the school on the sidewalk to stretch. I was with my friend group of 5 girls, and we were walking behind as always because PE for us was talking about the school drama all period. So we were walking and talking about the recent drama when a red truck slowed down beside us. It wasn't unusual. Every time we were walking outside of the school, a creepy man would slow down, so we didn't think anything of it and just kept walking and ignoring him. We saw his truck 2 or 3 more times. He was driving around the school and slowing down every time he passed by us, so we decided to tell our teacher that made us go back inside, in the gym. We started playing whatever game we were doing when the teacher came up to me and told me that I was asked to go to the main office because someone was there to pick me up. I was panicking because no one was supposed to pick me up during class that day, and I thought that maybe something bad happened to either my mom or my dad, or someone in my family. So I got changed into my normal clothes, grabbed my backpack, and rushed to the office. When I got there, the lady told me that there was a man waiting for me outside of the main doors. I got a little confused because usually when my parents came to pick me up, they'd wait in the hall until I got there. I took a look through the glass door and saw an old man. I had never seen this man once in my life. I quickly walked back to the office and told the lady that I didn't know who that was, and what she told me next froze me. She told me that he was a friend of my parents and that they had asked him to come pick me up because my mom got into a car accident. He told the lady my name and my last name, my age, my mom's name, and the grade I was in. I was shocked and immediately asked her if I could call my parents to confirm. So I called my dad, and he told me my mom was just fine, and he was at work. The lady just told me to go back to class, and I never saw that man again. I never knew what happened after I left, and how did he know all of that information about me? My parents talked to some cops about this, and there was never anything of it. We never had answers. Since that happened, I moved to a much safer city, and I hope I'll never see this man again. This happened to me a few years ago. I used to go to school at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm a runner, and the campus is in a beautiful redwood forest, so I would run on the trails. One day I left a little later than usual on a run though, one of the more isolated trails. Here's where it gets weird. I was about 15 minutes running deep into the woods and still hadn't seen anyone else around. Suddenly, up ahead, I saw what appeared to be a homeless man in ragged clothing walking on the trail. Now, he was walking further into the woods, and this path went very, very far, and the sun was setting. AKA, this man was spending the night in the woods. I wanted to reach my usual running checkpoint before turning around, so I decided to keep my distance and run by. As soon as I passed the man, he called out to me, "What came first, light or sound?" In my head, I was like, what the fuck, this guy is nuts. But I decided to humor him and yelled out light without looking back. He said, "Well, I think it's sound, but who knows?" And then he started mumbling to himself. I just continued on. I reached my goal and started to head back. It was really dark now, and I was feeling a bit sketched out that I had to pass this guy again to get back. He seemed pretty crazy and potentially dangerous, but I didn't really have a choice. I got past the point where I first passed him, but he was nowhere to be seen. There weren't any other branches off the trail, and if he had headed back, I would have seen him by then. He must have gone off the trail. Suddenly, a girl from on top of the hill screamed for me to stop. I stopped and looked up on the hill, but it was too dark to see anything. I was freaked out. I called out to ask if she was alright, and eventually saw her climbing down. The hill was really steep, so she put in a lot of effort to get up there and away from whatever was after her. She said that she was on a run when a scary homeless guy started harassing her, and he chased her up the hill. But she didn't know where he went. She was just going to spend the night there until I came along because she was too scared to go back down. At this point, we both wanted to get the hell out of there. Who knew if this creepy man was lurking around watching us from the dark or something? So we ran back together and made it to the road. She thanked me and we parted ways. I never ran back on that trail again. Santa Cruz can be a pretty weird place. I've heard legends of students flunking out of the school there and then just living in the forest. Maybe this guy was a student from years past. Before reading this, I just want to clarify that this post is not an attack on the honor system of League of Legends. It's more of a personal statement. My client crashed midway through a game 2 days ago, and I was feeling pretty tired, so I just logged off and went to sleep. After relogging today, I noticed that I had received an honor from that game, the, quote, honorable opponent one to be exact. I originally thought that someone DDoSed it, but the fact that I received honor from it was weird to me. I couldn't really remember what the game was about, since it was so short, but luckily I had the recording of it on my LoL replay, despite it not showing up in my match history. I played Nocturne Jungle for that game like I usually do, more recently now because of the new skin, and I had a pretty standard build for about 15 minutes, which was a Madrid's Razor, some boots, a Vamp Scepter, and a few health pots up until the point that my client crashed. Upon rewatching it, I realized off the bat that something was off about that game. The enemy jungler never connected. In the loading screen, his or her name never appeared. Typical, I thought. The name is probably in another language. But after the screen loaded, I saw that he simply had no name. Stranger yet, he was also a Nocturne player. From the beginning, he still sat in his base. I might as well describe to you what happened during the game. We started out normally, and I jungled and ganked, but no one died for the first 15 minutes or so. Everyone was reasonably leveled and farmed, with every player being in the 6 to 10 level range, save for the enemy Nocturne. It was at 15 minutes and 13 seconds when I used my ultimate to get what seemed to be an assured kill on the enemy Soraka. This is when the game crashed. Or when I thought it crashed. My recorder thought otherwise. In the replay, the screen glitched for about 10 seconds after I ulted her, with everything freezing in place. When I was actually playing the game, it was during that glitch that my client froze and closed on me. But in the replay, after the glitch, it showed us all still playing. This really freaked me out, but I kept watching. Apparently, my, quote, character secured the kill on Soraka, recalled and continued to jungle. That's when I read the eerie message. ... has reconnected. The no-name jungler on the other team got back into the game somehow and started to jungle. I felt uneasy watching him. The other lanes kept at each other, and it didn't take long for me to figure out the next oddity. The Soraka, quote, I had killed, never respawned. When I pressured tab to see the death timer, there was none. She just stayed dead. An ally has been slain. This time someone on my team died, the Ezreal, and it was the enemy Nocturne who killed him. He never respawned either. I froze in my chair, watching people die one by one, each death leaving a lasting impression on me. The Nocturne that I was, quote, supposedly playing did everything that I would have done, which weirded me out even further. It was almost like I was still playing in that match. After each player died, none would respawn. I was always on edge whenever I saw my character getting low on health, to the point that I was gripping my desk. I can't really explain why, but it's a nerve-wracking feeling knowing that if your character died, they wouldn't come back. I kept telling myself it was a glitch, but after what happened next, I found it hard to. There were only 3 people left. Me, the no-name Nocturne, and the enemy mid laner, Diana. At this point, my eyes were glued to the screen, and I couldn't help but watch as my character pursued her. This was the death that disturbed me the most. My character ulted towards her as I normally would have done, and met her at her Wraith camp. Just as my character got there, I saw the enemy Nocturne standing still in the passage to the red buff. He just stood there and watched my Nocturne destroy the enemy Diana. After her death, everything was still. The minions didn't move, the projectiles were frozen in place, along with my character. Everything was frozen except the no-name jungler. He moved towards me and paused for a second. The timer in the recording was still going. Curious as to why he just stood there, I checked my settings on the recording. The chat box was unchecked. I remember my fingers shaking a bit as I clicked to check it. The no-name jungler had been typing throughout the entire match after the apparent crash. All he said, over and over, every single minute was, "Kill them all. Kill them all. Kill them all." Up until I had killed Diana. I felt my heart sink when I read those words decorated across my screen. What he said soon after, though, was what sent chills throughout my entire body. "Thank you for your assistance." And that's when the game ended. No Nexus was destroyed, no surrender vote was cast. It just ended. Horrified at what I just witnessed, I immediately took down the names of everyone in that game. After a bit of searching, I found that none of them played another game after that one. I'm still checking every few minutes, hoping that one of them will get in the game soon. I don't really know what happened to those people, and I don't think that I want to know. I've since deleted that recording from my computer. I don't want anything to do with that replay. The image from seeing that honorable opponent message on my screen from logging in is still burned into my head. Never have I felt so undeserving. I've been sailing all of my life and have somewhere around 6,000 sea miles as well as years and years of inland dinghy racing experience. The sea just does strange things sometimes. Wind against tide and underwater obstacles causing weird currents create unnatural waves, and it starts to feel like the sea is just throwing water at you at random. Fog at sea, especially at night, really fucks up your senses too. Everything is quiet and you can't see anything but the boat immediately around you. You keep looking for lights on other ships and listening for foghorns or the sounds of engines in the distance, and your brain starts playing all manners of tricks on you. In a busy shipping lane, it's serious business, and in a very real way, it could be life or death if you miss a ship that hits you and sinks you. You start to see lights everywhere around you. You start hearing engines creeping up on you. You'll stop your boat and cut the engine to see if you're really hearing any of these things, and you enter an even stranger world of sensory deprivation. It's eerie as hell. A second edit to add this one that I just remembered. We saw one in the middle of the English Channel, and it was the strangest thing. There was this thin cloud, but the sun was visible through it. We were within the total eclipse zone and could see the shadow coming from miles away. It looked like the biggest, most angry storm I've ever seen. Generally, the darker the clouds, the more it was going to hurt. This was a darkness as dark could be at sea during the day. I talked to my dad about it afterward, and we both felt a real uneasiness getting worse and worse the nearer it got. Our bodies and subconscious were readying us to deal with something really shitty or dangerous. It was just like how some people describe sometimes seeing a ghost. A cold chill and feeling really on edge. It really was like a ghost storm. A lot of sailing becomes instinctual after a while, and you get a feeling about what's coming from watching the clouds and waves off on the horizon. The eclipse gave off every sign of absolute nastiness, but passed without any real-world effect other than the darkness. It was just really creepy. In November of 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit our forested property near the Delaware River in New York. We had thought that since we lived a couple of hours inland and over 1,000 feet higher than sea level, we were fairly safe. We've always made some preparations in case of emergencies, but we had a lot to learn about being ready for a situation like this. We knew the storm was approaching quickly and it was going to be severe. We had waterproof canoeing go bags ready, and we had a 625-gallon above-ground water storage tank and a good non-electric water purification system. Even our dog had his saddlebags packed with his food and supplies, but we were not prepared for the insanity of this storm. Bugging out was not an option, at least by car. When the storm hit, the winds kept getting stronger. Just when we thought it was as bad as it could get, the wind picked up even more. Trees blew down and ripped out the power lines to our house. The circuit breaker box exploded. Several large conifers fell on top of our house, partially crushing the roof. Our daughter was watching the storm just as the wind hit and a huge tree blew down and landed directly on the roof above her room. An old garden trellis made from large timbers took the brunt of the force and probably saved her life. We gathered the kids to the center of the little house as far from windows as we could get, and we had a few battery-powered LED lanterns lit because the power was out. Trees and downed power lines blocked our streets, so we had to shelter in place and tough it out. I think that there might have been a tornado along with the hurricane too, because some trees were twisted in half and not just blown down in one direction. Once the storm passed, we had to assess the damage. No one was hurt, thankfully. We made sure the propane tank was shut off and every appliance was unplugged. Clearing the driveway and property of downed trees and debris took several days. We had no intention of clearing the roads of trees. It was too dangerous since the power lines crisscrossed everywhere. We were able to check in on our neighbors and offer what assistance we could. We had to stay in the house since the roads were impassable and dangerous. Since we had a private well and used an electric well pump, we had no running water. We had plenty of fresh water in the water tank, fortunately, and every drop of water we consumed went first through our countertop purification system. After the house was rebuilt and the storm was mostly behind us, we made a list of things that we could have done better. The first thing we did was to make a plan in case we got separated. Perhaps next time an emergency struck, we might not all be home. We planned where we could meet and who we might call for information. Over the next couple of years, we invested in a wood-burning stove and a generator that could run on either gasoline or propane. Gasoline was scarce for weeks after the storm and rationed. 20-pound propane tanks were available, though. We also built a battery bank for backup power. Several deep cycle batteries connected to a power inverter. So we had 2 power sources. We now all keep a pair of jeans and sturdy slip-on shoes next to our beds, so we're ready to go in 5 minutes flat. A few other changes were made to our preparations. We got 2 camp-type toilets, emergency non-perishable foods like freeze-dried backpacking meals, MREs, canned foods, more lanterns, and extra batteries of all types. We got a good quality AM, FM, and weather radio that runs on either batteries, AC power, or a crank, and we doubled the size of our garden. Some 8 years later, we continued to improve our emergency preparations and refine our plans. I remember the day Hurricane Ike struck Texas and Louisiana back in 2008. It was a Friday night, September 12, 2008, in Houston, Texas. I was 11 at the time and my mom and dad were sitting in front of the TV watching as Ike crept closer towards Texas. My dad went to Walmart and got some dry food, flashlights, and batteries for the storm. I remember being really nervous because of the size of Ike. It was almost 450 miles wide, and the damage it might cause overnight. I was walking around thinking the worst and even taking a long last look at my apartment complex with my neighbor's friend. It started getting windy around 6 p.m., the winds were around 40 miles per hour, and we got scared and ran home. Twigs from the 100-foot pine trees started to break off and leaves were flying everywhere. My mom and I were walking to Pop's supermarket to get some last-minute things, and the checkout line was really long. When we were finally done, the winds blew open the door and everybody went silent. We went home as quickly as we could. Dad was in the bedroom with his hard hat on, playing with the flashlight, and he watched the news. There was a phone bank with citizens asking questions to Dr. Neal on Channel 11 about what kind of damage they could expect. I ran outside at 10 p.m. and the winds were still at 40 miles per hour, but they started to gust past 50, and I was on the porch watching the palm trees near me sway in the wind. More leaves and trash were airborne now. I couldn't stand against wind as I tried to go downstairs, and the wind kept pushing me back. I gave up and went back upstairs once my folks told me it was no longer safe to be wandering around. The wind was howling at the back window. My dad managed to use an old bed to cover the window, and it was reinforced with the couch in his bedroom. I tried to fall asleep, but the wind was howling consistently, and gusts started to become a little more frequent. At around 11:30 p.m., it was getting really blustery outside, and my dad was trying to microwave a burrito. Worst time for a snack, if you ask me. And that's when the lights started to flicker. We ran to the closet, but we started to fuss when my mom didn't want to get in. She was terrified, and we tried to calm her down, but another loud gust blew in and the carport downstairs started rumbling. The wind was starting to make squealing and screeching noises now. We were silent for a couple of minutes, staring at the back window. I could see an outline of the trees whipping in the wind from the streetlight. Dad and I went inside, and Mom slept in the living room. For another 30 minutes, the lights would flicker as we listened to Paul and Tom on the radio. I lay down on the floor, and Dad sat on his big toolbox playing with the flashlight. At around 12:30 a.m., we lost power completely, and the winds got even louder. It sounded like a train one minute and a wolf howling the next second. The winds were probably between 70 and 80 miles per hour by that time. My dad went out to get my mom, but I remembered my mom opening the door to look outside to get a peek. It was terrifying. In the sea of darkness, the palm trees were bending back and forth violently. Water was falling from the roofs like Niagara Falls, and the giant pine trees were bending at 45-degree angles with branches just snapping off. Mom closed the door and finally took refuge in the closet. She was crying at one point, and we told her that we were going to make it out. At 1:30 a.m., the back window shattered and glass and rain started to come in. I flashed a light to help Dad see, and he had to go get some trash bags to cover the TV and computer in his room, and push the couch to push the beds that were covering the broken window back up, but the winds kept pushing them down again. Around 2 a.m., the radio said Ike made landfall at Galveston and Houston, and the surrounding area was being battered by high winds and heavy surge flooding. Dad took note of the sky looking orange when we opened the closet door to let some cool air in since it was hot inside the closet. I heard debris hitting the building and the wind was deafening. The winds were above 75 miles per hour at that time. All night the wind was screaming. We spent 10 to 12 hours in the closet until noon on Saturday. It was a mess outside. Shingles littered the floor and the tree branches and twigs were everywhere. My dad's old pair of shoes were actually still outside next to the door though. The courtyard was even worse. Pine trees were snapped in half and entire trees were down on the ground. I helped our neighbors clean up the debris and clear the pathways, and Dad went out to get more food and water. We ate what we could and had to walk around to find some food and hot water. Mom and Dad were really upset, but glad that we made it out unscathed. We walked around the neighborhood seeing the damage, and there was a lot of tree damage and some leaning power lines. I actually couldn't even sleep that Saturday night because of all the humidity. My mom and I were listening to updates from the major and city officials. We were both scared out of our wits, and I cried, but my mom reassured me that we made it and we were okay. By Sunday afternoon, the power was restored, and we started to learn about the true devastation Ike did to the state. I was thankful that we didn't lose our home completely, or lives for that matter. Some areas along the coast were wrecked or wiped out from the storm surge. I remember the reporter on Channel 13 trying to get a grip on his emotions as he went through the damage and ruins at Bolivar Peninsula. Watching all the wreckage, it really ran a chill down my spine, but it showed me the true power of these cyclones. Ike would cause me to take preparations more seriously, and now I stock more supplies to prepare for every season. I know it's not much of a story, but tropical cyclones are nothing to mess with. This is the story I'll tell my kids one day. When I was younger and stupider and going to college in the North Georgia mountains, my friends and I would go night hiking a lot in the trails near campus. I got pretty familiar with the area and being out in the wilderness at night in general, which probably made me too confident. One night, the full moon was out, and the weather was perfect, so visibility was crazy good. Everything was basically washed in a dim blue light. I was slightly stoned and feeling adventurous, and I love doing fun stuff alone, so I decided to go enjoy a night hike by myself. I took a flashlight, but this was around 2002, so I didn't have a cell phone. I chose a super easy trail that was mostly flat, maybe a mile loop. It was in a pretty secluded area, but not exactly a national park or anything very rural like that. I didn't even need my flashlight for most of it, and I just hiked in the moonlight. It was actually really cool and a beautiful experience at first. At some point, I started feeling uneasy, and maybe a millisecond later I heard a man's voice. It was coming from a good distance ahead of me, somewhere off in the woods, maybe from the right side of the trail. He was crying. I'm honestly an empathetic person, and 99.9% of the time I hear someone crying, I want to comfort or help them in some way. But this time I felt sick to my stomach, like a dry panic, if that makes sense. I remember coming very close to calling out to him because my brain was trying to tell me he might be hurt, which was the only reason I hesitated. But it was like my body shut my voice down before I could say anything, and I knew that I had to stay very quiet. He was sobbing like he had just found out a loved one had died, but also gibbering. It was almost like babbling, like he was less than a person. There was a shrillness to it, under his crying, like he was holding back a scream, but perpetually on and on, as if he had been doing it all night. I remember it vividly, and my spine is tingling like crazy even as I write this. It's hard to explain, but I knew deep down he wasn't right in the head, and nothing good would happen if he realized I was listening. I went back the way I came. It was like I had tunnel hearing, and the only sound in the world was that crying. I was hyper aware of everything else around me, and beyond paranoid that I would snap a branch or snag my boot on something. I worried that the man's crying would get louder if I wasn't paying razor-sharp attention, like getting closer or turning into an outraged crazy person's scream altogether. Thankfully though, it just faded the further I got from it, and I made it back to my car. Still, I was convinced some wide-eyed hermit was going to rush out of the forest and try to bite me to death or something, right up to the second I locked my doors and got the fuck out of there. I finally had the rest of my panic attack on the drive back. I managed to park back at the campus, and I just sat in the car and collected myself. Adrenaline is fucking powerful. I never felt a shred of guilt about leaving that guy crying out in the woods in the dark. I know I was slightly stoned, but slightly is the key word there. I'm convinced to this day I was in very real danger that night. Definitely not as insane as many of the stories in threads like these, but sometimes I get that same sick feeling deep down, whenever I wonder what might have happened if the moon had been less bright, or if I had been more responsible and I decided to use my flashlight even once. He would have seen me for sure. I worked for a nonprofit that relied on big donations from very wealthy donors. This meant cultivating relationships with some very wealthy people. One of the donors I was tasked with shepherding, let's call him D, invited me out for a weekend yachting off and around near Catalina Island. I was excited. My partner gets seasick, so we never really did boat trips even though we lived near the coast. Our first night out was beautiful, and we're all lounging on the deck of this gorgeous yacht talking about eerie ocean stuff. D mentions that he has this thin, inflatable rollout panel that he tethers to the boat and lets float out into the water. It has 100 foot or so of rope that people can use as a sort of swimming platform. We get the bright idea that we should unfurl this thing into the darkness and experience the freakiness of it at night. I was equal parts frightened and curious, as was everyone else, so a group of 4 of us did it while 2 others stayed on the boat. We get the thing out, slide it into the water, check the rope, and push off. It's pretty instantly terrifying. You can see the dim lights on the boat, but after about 40 feet it seems really, really far away. But it was undeniably awesome too. We're chatting quietly to ourselves, but mostly we're being quiet and just taking in the weird mix of fear and awe of being so close to the water in the middle of the night. We get to the point where the tether gets taut and you can immediately feel the current tugging us away from the big boat, which again is freaky, but we're confidently tied to the yacht. It's hard to see much of anything other than a few lights on Catalina. We're on the ocean side, not the bay side, even though we're not far from shore. I lie back flat on the platform and everyone else does the same. The water wasn't rough, but it was moving, so you would get rocked in random directions and splashes of water that would lip up over the edge and get everyone wet. Honestly, it was kind of nice. All of the sudden though, the feeling of the waves that were kind of random and choppy transitioned to a very smooth swell. This makes us all gasp. We're rising, and rising, quickly but smoothly, and everyone jolts up. There's virtually no light from the moon, but it's enough for us to notice the gigantic fucking thing just under the surface of the water from us. As soon as we notice it, it's already passing, and it sets in that it must have been a massive, massive whale moving right below us, maybe just a foot or 2 down, and we're feeling the water displacement from it. No one makes a fucking peep. I immediately grab the tether and start pulling us in though, and others start to help. No one makes a sound until we get back to the big boat, which no one leaves for the rest of the trip. It's all we talk about for the next 24 hours. Needless to say, I now have a healthy fear of the ocean, especially at night. People are tiny, and the ocean is big. I have a bad habit of walking alone at night. I love it. I know it's not the best plan as a small woman, but it's one of those things that just gives me joy. Speaks to my soul, I guess, as cheesy as it sounds. I do carry pepper spray and keep my phone in my hand, but hell if I'll let fear ruin something I love. Summer nights are the best. The light lingers forever in the P&W. You get these endless twilights and there's this beautiful breath of coolness coming out from a dense green, even when it's hot in the daytime. I lived in the desert as a teenager, and I still just love the cool, silky feeling air here. Silly, but I do. Soaking up the night air is amazing. I live in a small town at the head of a very long rural trail. It winds through lowland marshy areas, dense woods, fields, and at night is silent and isolated. 99.9% of the time, nobody is out there in the night except me, bats, and the rare bicyclist. Once you get outside of the city limits about a mile, there's nobody to fuck with, so there's nobody looking to fuck with you, if you get my meaning. The only houses are sparse, and far across ravines and fields covered with blackberry cane, no streetlights, and no easy exit from the trail. I put one headphone in, and I walk for hours and miles. I usually take a big crossbody purse with a water, my ID, a little cash, and start to walk while the light leaves the sky. I only use my phone light when it gets pitch dark. This night, I was far out into the boonies, just me and the maple trees kissing over the trail, and it was full on dark, like really deep dark by then. And I'm cruising along, listening to a podcast in one ear with my little phone light. It's a beautiful night, and I'm just soaking it all in, and have been out for a few hours and heading back, but still some miles out. Suddenly, there's this extra pitch black, like a big splotch resolving itself out of the dense shadows across the trail. It took me a second to realize, oh yeah, that's not a trick of the light, it's actually something. It's a big black mass all across the trail in front of me, not moving, but it's blocking the trail. I start getting the creeps, chills. This is not normal, and it's between me and home. There's no other choice, so I slowly creep up to whatever it is. A black puddle? Then, as I get close, I see blood smears. Not a lot, but fuck, that's traces of blood on the paved trail. I put the big girl panties on and walk close, phone cued to 911. The shadow resolved itself into a dude in a big flappy black coat sprawled across the whole trail. He was surrounded by small bloodstains. So I say, "Hey man, are you okay?" And surprise, this guy sits up. He's sunburnt and grimy but coherent, and kind of chipper. He goes, "Oh, I'm okay. Just resting. Hey, you got any water?" I forked over my water bottle and told him to go ahead and keep it. He took it and thanked me. He'd scraped his bare foot and wandered around for a bit, deciding to take a breather, which was what the blood was from. I recognized him. He's a local meth head and drunk. He's either slightly drunk or kind of peaceful and belligerent on meth. Today, he was sobering up and tired. I asked him if I could call anyone, or 911 or whatever. Nope, he was just chilling. I carefully skirted around him and headed back home. I did not have any particularly warm or cozy feelings about him, having hosed his puke off of my porch a few times, and being called, the quote, "see you next Tuesday" word more than once by him, so I left it at that. Anyway, a few months later, he attacked a random tourist with a machete downtown in broad daylight. He sliced their leg open and went to prison. I had a total creep of a WoW guild leader. After a few months' break, I renewed my WoW account and transferred servers to be with this girl I used to play with. We had always been two peas in a pod, and she convinced me to come join her guild. She was a very pretty young lady, so it was no surprise that she had a lot of guys in our guild wrapped around her finger, including the guild leader, who mistakenly thought that we were dating. When he realized it wasn't what he thought, the guild leader had a complete fucking raging meltdown, and he came to me for guidance. It turns out that he lived about 8 or so blocks from me. He discovered this because many of us had exchanged MySpace accounts beforehand, and naturally he wanted to get together and talk about it. I declined, obviously, since he was kind of a weird dude. Think Vork from the guild. But soon it became clear that he was seeing me as more than just a guildmate, and that he was very eager to see me. One day, he messaged me online and said, "I think I was driving behind you today. Do you live on blank street?" The only place I had gone to that day was the college that I attended, which was not 2 minutes away from where I was living at the time. I drove a trashy convertible at the time, so I take it that's how he recognized me. And like I said, he did live about 8 blocks away from me. He started making jokes about climbing through my window and, quote, scaring me at night and stuff. He just loved joking about knowing where I lived, the types of trees in my yard, the cars in my driveway, the things he saw going on outside whenever he allegedly had driven by. This went on for quite a while despite me telling him to knock it off, and I didn't think it was appropriate to call the cops over someone knowing my mom planted roses outside that day or something. After a few months, I started playing on another server, and we lost connection. Thank God. I have been through 3 major hurricanes that tore up my area of Virginia pretty badly. My first lesson was learned with Hurricane Isabel in 2003. Isabel really messed our area up in the northern neck of Virginia. We had no power for 13 days. There was nowhere to get gas or ice, and I will never forget the howling of the winds and thinking that this will never stop. Many houses were lost into the Rappahannock and Potomac rivers during Isabel. My next experience was with Hurricane Irene. A microburst, or a powerful wind, came right across the street. It looked like someone's hand just cut a swath right through the trees, and I still remember the sound of that wind. It creeps me out every time. There was no power again for 7 days. Last year, Hurricane Michael got us. No power for 5 days, and many main roads were washed out. Several roads were impassable until this past March. I do not play with these storms. Don't think just because you're not taking a direct hit that it can't be destructive. Prepare ahead of time. Buy lots of water, fill up large buckets with water to flush toilets, buy batteries, charcoal to cook food. Table sandwich food like peanut butter and jelly will help too. Always have paper plates and plastic utensils. Get baby wipes for personal hygiene for everyone, not just babies. Fill your vehicles up with gas and remember your pets. Get extra pet food, litter, etc. Get your prescriptions and over-the-counter medicines ahead of time. And don't forget that you need an NOAA weather radio when the power goes out to stay on top of things. Be prepared to be self-sustaining for days, because you will be without power for days and possibly stranded for days too. Do not ever wait until the last minute to gather supplies, and if they tell you to evacuate, then do it. I used to often spend my summers bouldering with my friends by a relatively large forest that was about an hour and a half away from where I used to live. We used to spend some of the nights camping out there just to save some travel costs and time. Anyway, I think this was roughly like the 3rd or 4th time we were out there camping. My friend had left all of her climbing gear and her rucksack just outside her tent, or we definitely think she did anyway. The next morning we found her boots, a few clothes, and all of her chalk powder had disappeared. We figured that it could have been completely feasible that she misplaced it, although we were quite sure they were right next to her tent. We didn't really want to believe that they were stolen. Anyway, we didn't really read much into this, and just stupidly said to ourselves that perhaps she had left it by the boulders and some animal took an interest to it. I know it sounds really stupid, but it was very reasonable to us at the time. Anyway, fast forward a year, we're at the same spot as usual, sitting by the tents and chilling after having some food. Mind you, it's pitch black out, and only the camp area is lit by the fire. I go somewhere a bit out of sight for a lash, and what do I see? A dude in a full-on ghillie suit laying on his stomach looking right toward our campsite. I just stood there frozen as this dude clocks that I've seen him, and he just bolts it out of there. I don't know whether the event of the year prior was related to the ghillie suit guy, but this definitely is stuck to all of us. We haven't been back there since, which is a damn shame. This was on a dive trip near Komodo National Park in Indonesia a few years ago. It was one of a series of dives to get my advanced diving certificate, and this was my memory of what happened. About 25 minutes into our dive, it occurred to me that I might die. My girlfriend and I were in the strongest current we've ever dived in. We had been swimming upstream for what felt like 10 minutes, and we'd only moved about 2 feet. My muscles were burning, and I was sucking air as if I was running uphill on a treadmill. I then noticed I only had about 500 psi left in my tank. This is the magic number at which dive masters assemble their divers to begin a safety stop, waiting 3 minutes at 5 meters to decompress before ascending to the surface. We were only 3/4 of our way through the dive, and at the rate I was sucking air, I was worried I'd be through it in the next 5 minutes. I glanced over to my girlfriend, and she didn't seem to be doing much better. She was struggling to move ahead, and now putting her hand out for our dive master to help. We were swimming towards a reef and had the open ocean behind us. If we couldn't hold our position there, we'd be whisked backwards, out of reach of the reef, and into the big blue where we'd be by ourselves, far off from the boat pickup spot. With that idea turning over in my head, matched with the knowledge that other divers had been lost in the currents around Komodo National Park, and seeing my girlfriend in trouble, I first got angry. What the hell were we doing here? God damn it, this is ridiculous. Why did we ever get into this when we read the currents were so strong? I saw the dive master take her by the hand and drag her to a rock on the sea floor, which the dive master then mimed for her to hang on to. Shit, I don't think I have enough strength to swim over to that rock, I thought. recognizing it was about 20 feet away, and for the past minute, I hadn't had any forward progress against the unseen hurricane-like current floating straight at me. My anger then turned to panic, and my breath quickened. I was sucking in air at twice my normal rate, which meant the time left on my tank, which I said earlier was around 5 minutes, would now be cut even further. Of course, realizing this underwater only added to my fear, making the situation worse, which then gave me something more to panic about. It was a real productive time. If it were an equation, it would look a little bit like this. I'm running out of strength, plus running out of air, plus my girlfriend is in trouble, plus how am I going to get to that rock equals panic. My legs were getting weaker, and my jaw, which had until now forced my teeth around my regulator with crazy glue-like strength, also started to go slack. I now started swallowing water. At this point, something new occurred to me. Here it is in the equation. I'm running out of strength, plus running out of air, plus my girlfriend is in trouble, plus how am I going to get to that rock, plus swallowing water equals death. Our dive master, who had secured her onto a rock, looked back at me and I mimed the underwater signal, which I'm sure no dive master wants to see. 2 hands around my throat to say I was out of air. This wasn't true, of course. I still had air, but I couldn't summon the strength to get to it. Instead, I was sucking in water. Plus, my mask had started to leak. Regardless, it was a game of semantics, and I got my panic across. In the few seconds it took for her to swim over, I had to fight every impulse in me that said to get to the surface, get out of the water, surface, and ditch the dive completely. I could do this, but it was a gamble. If I didn't give myself a chance to decompress and flew to the surface, I was worried I'd get the bends and be trading in one bad situation for another. Although choking underwater didn't feel like a great alternative, I stayed put long enough until our dive master swam over. She gave me her secondary regulator to breathe from and pulled me over to the rock my girlfriend was hanging onto for our safety stop. While her regulator helped, it was only a half measure because I still had trouble finding the strength to bite down hard enough to keep water from getting past the regulator and then swallowing it. I had a moment on the rock with our dive master, doing my best underwater mimicry to explain my breaths were half air, half gulps of water. She then encouraged me to calm down. Solid advice, I thought. And I did my best to slow down my breathing. It worked for a while as we hung onto the rock, but I was still swallowing water, and it was a horrible feeling that I wanted to get away from. Realizing the constraints we were under, i.e. going to the surface without a proper safety stop, could be a problem, I looked at her through my mask and gave her the sign to surface, which she replied to at first with a sign of patience. Again, solid advice, but I was panicked, and I kept signaling the surface again. Can we go up now? Like a kid in the backseat of his parents' car asking, are we there yet? How about now? After my constant nagging, we eventually surfaced, and I promptly broke the waves. I then puked back the sea I had swallowed. I was alive. After a brief celebration, it turned out to be a small comfort. I had a chat with our dive master, and I agreed that it was the right decision. We were going to dive again in an hour. In truth, it was the last thing I wanted to do. I would rather have stayed above the water, on board sipping hot tea with a towel around myself, soaking in some sun. But I knew, like the proverbial saying, get right back on a horse, it made sense. And it made the difference. I was glad we got back in, because our remaining dives there were really amazing. This one, though, I'll never forget. So this happened a few months ago. I had just gotten Red Dead Redemption, which is an awesome game. And while I was playing online, I met this awesome guy named Rick. He's in like his 50s and is a retired firefighter. We played together for a while, and he was helping me level up so that people wouldn't target a low-level player who was also a girl. After a while, he introduces me to this guy named Black Wolf Angel or something like that. Black seemed cool at first. We would hang out on RDR, shooting lots of bandits and doing gang hideouts. After a while, we became somewhat good friends. He then started to lightly flirt with me every once in a while. I let it slide, being the kind person that I am. I made it my goal, though, to not get a so-called, quote, Xbox boyfriend, so I tended to avoid flirting on there. We would normally hang out in parties with Rick, but one time he invited me to a party and I was like, oh okay, he and Rick want to play. But instead I was dead wrong. He started to flirt super heavily with me. I acted like I had to go, so I just left. For weeks, he would spam me with party invites and messages saying, "Hey sexy," and stuff like, "I'm so horny." It finally got to the point where I was so sick of him. So, when he invited me the last time, I answered, big mistake, and he started with the usual flirting, and I just said, "Look, Black, I'm not interested in any kind of relationship right now, so please just lay off." He agreed and laid off for a few days. But then, he broke the silence by sending me a message saying, "I'm thinking of suicide because of you." I flipped my shit and started to curse him out and telling him to never contact me again. I told Rick all about it, and he told me that he stopped talking to him a few days before for the same reason. So, for a while everything was cool, but then I started to get phone calls and text messages saying the same shit he used to say. I answered one said call and told him to fuck off or I'll go to the police. Thankfully, he stopped after that. So Black from Xbox Live, let's never meet again, you creep. Edit. I never even gave him my number. Also, it turns out that he stalked my friend and questioned her for my number. He had threatened to hack her account. Before I begin this story, I'd like to add that I'm a 26-year-old female, but at the time of the events, I was only 17. Back when I was in high school, this all took place in 2014, I met a girl who I'll call Carly. Carly was pretty. She had long red hair and friendly dark brown eyes, sort of like Bella Thorne. She always wore bright, happy, colorful clothing and lots of happy, earthy jewelry. She just looked like such a happy and bright person. She had a loud and outgoing, happy personality, too. Carly and I became friends. Everything was great in the beginning. She took me exploring to a bunch of abandoned houses in our town, and we took a bunch of selfies and pictures together, and she even let me stay the night at her house sometimes. Carly kissed me one day in her car. That led to us making out quite frequently after that. One day, she began taking videos of us making out on her Snapchat account. She told me she was going to send the videos to her ex-boyfriend, Michael. I thought this was random, but I didn't say anything. The next day at school, one of my friends, Allison, came up to me and was very upset. She told me Carly had sent videos of us making out to her boyfriend, Carson. She asked me why we would do such a thing. I was very confused and told her Carly told me she was sending those videos to an ex who lived in another state. Allison warned me and told me that Carly wasn't my friend. She said she wasn't anyone's friend. I didn't listen though and continued hanging out with Carly. I started dating one of Carly's guy friends who I'll call Garrett. She did not like this. One day I walked to Garrett's house and called Carly to say hi while doing so. She told me to be careful, but that she had to go. Garrett and I started walking around his neighborhood talking. Then next thing I know, Carly shows up out of nowhere with my ex in the back seat of her car. She was screaming at the top of her lungs that I didn't know what I wanted, and that I needed to get in her car so that she could take me home. Garrett tried telling her to leave, but she went ballistic and kept screaming. So we got in her car, and she dropped Garrett off and took me home, and was then acting all nice to me once I got in her car. She was telling me how much she loved me and how much I meant to her. I ended up staying the night with her that night. I remember becoming emotional in her room because I didn't like seeing my ex who I had recently broken up with before Garrett and I started dating. She climbed on top of me and started making out with me, and everything went black. I remember waking up the next morning and she took me home. Later that day, I had been admitted to a hospital because I was feeling unwell, reasons unrelated, so I was in the hospital for a few days. During this particular day, my boyfriend Garrett, my mom, and Carly had come to visit me. We were all visiting when Garrett kissed me. I didn't know this at the time, but my mom later told me that when Garrett kissed me, Carly had a very dark and evil look in her eyes as she stared at me. My mom said that that look gave her goosebumps and chills that ran up her spine. She said Carly looked completely evil, like she wished I would just die. Shortly after, I was released from the hospital. A few days later, when I was back at school, Carly completely shunned me. She wouldn't look at me, she wouldn't talk to me, she completely acted as if I didn't even exist. I had no idea what I had done wrong from the time she visited me in the hospital to now. At school, she gave me a very cold and dark death glare. If looks could have killed, I would have dropped dead. I avoided her after that and had no clue what I had done. She just acted like she hated my guts completely. Garrett and I eventually broke up, and I got back with my ex, the one that was in Carly's car that day. Now, after I was first released from the hospital, I noticed this sticky stuff all over the screen of the outside of my bedroom window. I had no idea what it was or where it came from. I was waiting for my boyfriend to get off of work one night. I had gone up there to visit him, and he randomly handed me his phone, so I got bored and decided to go through it. I saw that he had been texting Carly. As I was going through their text, I saw that she had been sending him sexual photos of herself. During the time that I was in the hospital and Carly would come to visit me and act like my best friend, she was going behind my back and sleeping with my ex. And that sticky stuff on the window? There was a text to my boyfriend from Carly that said, quote, "Let's egg her house again. That was fun." I immediately started crying, and my boyfriend, of course, was trying to justify all of this, claiming that he had only hung out with Carly because he missed me, and that he was upset that I was dating Garrett. Carly never spoke to me again. When I tried to confront her as to why she would egg my house and get with my ex while pretending to be my best friend, she tried to pin it all on my boyfriend, claiming that he was after her and that she had rejected him. That summer, Carly told all of my close friends that I had committed suicide. She started telling everyone that she had, quote, loved me so much and that I, quote, fucked her over. But I'm telling you, that look in Carly's eyes, it was like looking into pure evil. It was horrifying. It was like seeing who she really was, and to this day it still freaks me out. Years after this, I had spoken to a girl who Carly and I went to school with, who I'll call Maddie. Maddie and Carly had become the best of friends after Carly dropped me. Maddie told me, "You're nothing like she described you," and "She made you out to be this really horrible person, but you're nothing like that." It turns out that the reason Maddie and Carly stopped being best friends is because Maddie told me that Carly got her to do cocaine with her one night at a hotel, and they had sex. She told me that Carly then left the hotel to find Maddie's crush. It was a guy she had been in love with for a while, and then had sex with him that night, dumped off Maddie, and began dating that guy. Maddie's words were, quote, "She's not at all who she pretends to be." She wasn't. Carly wore the happiest and brightest of clothing. On the outside looking in, she appeared like the most loving person ever, and she knew how to make you feel so special, like you were the only one that mattered. But there was a real evil inside of Carly, something terrifyingly wrong, something extremely dark and deranged that you could only see once you got close enough to her before she hurt you. I've never seen Carly since, and I really hope I never have to again. So to the girl who pulled me in and made me believe we were the best of friends, let's not meet.